This happened back when I was in college. Spring break had just ended, and I was driving from my parents' house back to my college dorm. The drive itself was about 3 hours. There were a few small towns on the way, but other than that, it was pretty much just endless fields. I started my drive late, around 10:30 p.m. I was still making my way out of the town my parents lived in when I saw a hitchhiker walking on the side of the road. He was a tall, skinny guy carrying a duffel bag. As I got closer, he stuck out his thumb. I honestly felt really bad for the guy, and seeing as he was walking in the same direction I was going, I rolled down my window and asked if he wanted a ride. He named a nearby town and asked if I was going in that direction. I was, so I told him yes and unlocked the door. He got in the front seat, and I realized right away that he was a lot older than I thought, like, at least in his 40s. He kept to himself for a good part of the ride, which I actually didn't mind. I had the radio on, so it wasn't just awkward silence or anything. It wasn't until around 20 minutes into the drive with the guy that I started to think I made a mistake. The guy started clutching his stomach while groaning and complaining that he didn't feel well. He pretty much just hunched himself in the passenger seat, swaying back and forth. I told him to feel free to open up his window for some fresh air, but he never ended up doing it. To say I felt uncomfortable would be an understatement. Like, don't get me wrong, I understand if the dude wasn't feeling well, but here I am driving while just next to me is this guy groaning and swaying back and forth. There weren't really any towns or rest areas nearby. I didn't want to just tell the guy to get out and completely strand him in the middle of nowhere, so I kind of just sat there, trying to focus on the radio. This went on for another 15 minutes when the guy said, "Dude, I really don't feel good. Can you take the third next exit?" This caught me off guard. Not the part about wanting to stop, I was more so expecting him to say that at some point, but the part about the exit. The guy specifically said, "the third next exit." I remember those being his exact words. In the moment, I obviously thought it was weird. If I myself were sick, I would be much quicker to want to just pull onto the side of the road or at least take the very next exit. I asked the guy if he just wanted me to pull to the side of the road real quick, but he sternly told me no. This should have been a clear red flag, but I ultimately reasoned that the specific exit he wanted me to take must have had a rest area I was unaware of, so I agreed. A few minutes later, I took the exit, but absolutely nowhere in sight was any kind of rest area. I started pulling to the side of the road when the guy said, "No, keep going. We should go down a bit further." Again, this should have been a red flag I picked up on, but I did what he said. Eventually, he told me to stop. He got out and, within seconds, disappeared into the darkness. I waited for the guy to come back for a few minutes when I saw 5 hooded figures walking towards my vehicle, only revealed by the light of my headlights. They were clearly carrying weapons and now charging towards my vehicle. I threw the car in drive and started darting in the other direction, but they actually started shooting at me. From what I recall, 5 gunshots were fired, 2 of which hit the back of my car. Even still, I was able to get out of there. I didn't stop the rest of the way back. I did call the police and report it, but I never got any follow-up. When I made it back to my dorm, I found the bullet holes in the back of my car. I think it's worth noting that one of them was only a couple of inches from my tire, which makes me think whoever was shooting was aiming for the tires, but I'll never be able to know for sure. I don't fully know the motives of that hitchhiker that night, but at least to me, it's obvious he intentionally lured me into that specific spot, which, might I remind you, was nowhere near any type of civilization. I have since never picked up another hitchhiker. This happened multiple years back when I was around the age of 12. I was an only child, and back then, my family only had one car, which my dad would usually take to work each weekday. This meant any time my mom had to go somewhere while he was at work, she would either have to walk or hitchhike. Now, it should be mentioned that back then, hitchhiking was a lot more socially acceptable. Plus, at the time, we lived in a decently small town where, for the most part, everyone knew everyone. From what I can recall, this took place on a Thursday. My dad had dropped off my mom and me at the grocery store on his way to work. This, of course, meant we would have to find a ride back home. Though we'd done this many times before and never had any issues, only a couple of minutes into our walk back home, a driver pulled up next to us, willing to give us a ride. It was some guy in a white pickup truck who we had never seen before. He told us to get in the back, and we did. My mom started giving him directions to our home from the highway, but it honestly looked like the guy was just ignoring her. When we came to our exit, this was confirmed as he straight up drove right past it. The guy then went on to explain how he had to make a quick detour first. This was extremely unnerving, but after a while, we came up to a farm. The driver took out the keys, told us to wait in the car, and disappeared. My mom clearly didn't know what to do. I mean, we couldn't just leave. We were in an unfamiliar area in the middle of nowhere. A few minutes later, the driver came back, but now with a second guy. The guy looked at us and started flipping out, screaming at the driver. Now, I'm not sure if this is exactly what was said, but this is what I can remember. The guy screamed at the driver that he shouldn't have brought someone with a child and that there's no way anything can happen now. From what I recall, more things along those lines were said, but I can't remember exactly. The driver then got back in the truck and apologized to us. My mom sternly told the man to take us back to where he had picked us up. She technically hadn't given him our address yet and, for obvious reasons, now did not want that information known. The drive back was done in complete silence. Looking back, my mom and I both agreed that the purpose of that stop was not as innocent as a simple detour. We honestly see ourselves as lucky for making it out of that situation. We lived in that town for 5 years after that and never once saw those two guys again. This took place in November of 2005. Each year, my job would give us 10 vacation days. Seeing as I hadn't yet used any this year, I decided to take a week off to visit different states around the US. To get around, for the most part, I would actually hitchhike, which is something I've done multiple times in the past. Despite all the horrible recognition it gets nowadays, I actually really enjoy doing it. I've met a lot of people through hitchhiking that I still call friends to this day. Anyway, it was around 2:30 p.m. I was walking down the road giving the usual thumbs-up signal hitchhikers typically give. It had been a while since my last ride, and I'll be the first to admit I was getting a little desperate. Eventually, a red pickup truck pulled up next to me. Inside were two men, my best guess is they were in their 40 years old. One of them asked me where I was going, to which I responded. They both looked at each other for a second, then back at me, and signaled me to get in. They seemed normal enough, so I tossed my bag in the back, got in, and shut the door. But I quickly realized the whole floor of the vehicle was completely covered in different types of bullets. Before I had time to even rethink my decision, we were already going 60 down the highway. I tried to engage in some small talk to ease the tension, and it actually sort of worked. But somehow, the topic landed on how one of the guys had just gotten out of prison for aggravated assault. A disturbingly short amount of time later, they started asking me how much money I had. This is when I started to realize I could be in some serious danger. Now, I had been hitchhiking for a couple of days by that point. I didn't look the best, so I tried to play it off that I was homeless and had no money whatsoever. This response was met with complete silence. For the next 30 minutes or so, not a single word was said, though multiple times I would catch the driver looking up at me through the rearview mirror. I honestly just try to ignore it, something I regret doing to this day. Fast forward 20 minutes, and to my horror, the driver turned off the highway and started down some unpopulated dirt road. I instantly shot up and said, dude, where are we going? After 15 seconds of no response while the car was still driving, I grabbed my bag, unlocked the door, and dove out of the car. Instantly, I looked up to see the red pickup slam on its brakes, shortly after followed by the reverse lights turning on. I cannot explain to you how fast I got up and ran into a nearby cornfield. I ran for 5 minutes when I swear I could hear gunshots behind me. They were clearly distant, but still, I ran for another 5 minutes until I reached the sign for the main highway. I then called the police, explained the situation in my current location, and waited in the cornfield until an officer arrived. I was then driven to the nearest police station, where I filed a police report. Though in terms of descriptions, there wasn't really much I had to give other than 2 men inside a red pickup truck. I hadn't gotten the license plate number, and I didn't even really see the full faces of the guys or even remember them. The whole situation was no doubt the scariest thing I've ever experienced. I don't completely know what those guys had planned, but I truly believe I could have lost my life that day. While I still hitchhike occasionally, I am now far more cautious in the cars I get into. It was a rainy night and I was driving home from my shift at the late-night diner I work at. It was a quiet shift at work. I had a weird amount of energy still, so I knew I was going to have to pop a melatonin when I got home. I was driving my usual route, a scenic road during the day but majorly dark at night, lacking many light posts. There are occasional little parking lots with cute little strips of stores or family-owned restaurants and shops, and then just stretches of nothingness. And by nothingness, I mean forest. I was passing one of the aforementioned parking lots of a well-known deli, and under a light post was a woman standing out in the rain with her arm held out. She was waving me down. I slowed as I realized it was a slightly older woman who appeared to be in her 50s, maybe. This woman was really tall, like 5 feet 11 inches or 6 feet, but very skinny. I lowered my window and yelled, "Do you need a ride?" She came over to the front door and opened it, chanting how much of a hero I am. I asked where she was heading, and she said just up the road to town. She was soaking wet, getting my car all wet, but I like to think of myself as a good person and I couldn't, in good conscience, leave another woman out there in the cold rain. However, picking up a random man on the other hand would be a different story. The woman seemed sweet, but I noticed as I looked at her while talking to her that she was missing a few teeth, very, very off-putting. I had to now wonder if she were homeless. She didn't smell or look like a homeless person, though, but the rain soaking her and her clothes could have been masking any scent temporarily. Plus, her hair was so wet that what may have usually been scraggly undone hair could now have been weighted down and straightened by the water. Either way, the woman was smiling the whole time and didn't seem like a threat. We pulled up to an intersection with a gas station on one corner. I pulled in next to a pump, might as well fill up. I asked her if she wanted anything from inside. I was really doing my good deed for the week. She said, "No thanks, honey, so I went inside to pay the attendant for gas and some spiked seltzers since tomorrow was the weekend. When I got back to my car, the woman was gone. I looked around the gas station lot real quick, but it was tiny. She was gone. She must have run off somewhere. I felt slightly bad, feeling like she was some lost helpless woman, but part of me also felt slightly relieved. I filled up the tank of my SUV and was on my way home. When I got back to the house, I went straight inside my apartment, which is the first level of a two-family house. There's a tenant upstairs and me. The front door into the foyer was usually left unlocked, then the two doors leading to each apartment were locked. I let myself in out of the rain and into my apartment. I set the seltzers down on the counter. I wasn't that tired yet, so I took a melatonin and tried to go to bed. Even with the melatonin, though, I was having a hard time sleeping that night. My mind was kind of going wild with thoughts, a lot of thinking about that woman I picked up earlier and what happened to her. At certain points, I heard slight sounds from outside of my bedroom, but I dismissed them as sounds from the upstairs tenant. Boy, do I wish I had been more suspicious before falling asleep. I woke up in my dark bedroom, something that usually would never happen when I take a melatonin. I usually sleep like a baby through the night. I sat up, feeling drowsy and really thirsty too. I reached over the table next to my bed for my water, and then I saw and heard something across the room from me. I saw someone crouched in the corner of my bedroom behind a clothing dresser, with their legs folded. I had to be hallucinating it. I shook my head violently and made weird noises. I even slapped myself in the face, and now whoever was in the corner stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't scream, I didn't say a word. I sat in my bed in literal shock. The part that had me questioning my sanity for a bit after the figure was gone was that there wasn't a single sound from outside the room after this, no footsteps, not the sound of a door closing. I grabbed my phone and called my dad. He picked up, confused why I was calling so late. I told him what I just saw, and he said, "Carter, you probably just had a night terror." I stayed on the phone with him as I was continuing to become more awake. I left my room and turned on the lights to the living room outside. It was a small space, there was no one in there. I looked around the entire space and could confirm no one was there. I started to believe that maybe I did just hallucinated, but still, I slept with the bedroom door locked that night. When I woke up in the morning, I drank some coffee and got dressed for the gym. I went to open the door to the foyer and realized it was already unlocked. My heart sank. Last night, what I saw, was it real? I did another look around the apartment, confirming no one was inside. I went out to my car and opened the back door to put my gym bag in the back seat, and that's when I noticed the damp yellow-brownish stains all over the floor in the back, and my blanket that I always had back there was gone. I wanted to cry or scream. I figured it out. That woman snuck into the back seat last night when I was in the gas station. She either somehow unlocked the door to my apartment, or I mistakenly left it unlocked. I called my dad again, frantically asking him what to do. He said, check and make sure nothing was stolen, and if nothing was, then calling the police really wouldn't do anything. I checked the house and didn't find anything to be missing, just my blanket from the car. I skipped the gym that day. In fact, I stayed bottled up in my apartment for a while after that. I was just genuinely disturbed. I didn't want to live there for much longer after that, and so after that month, I found a new place to live. This happened a few months ago, and I don't know why I agreed, but I decided to go with my friend Elias to a house party he was attending during our first year of high school, even though I wasn't even invited. Elias was able to pull some strings, and I accepted the invitation knowing that I wouldn't be able to drive. I made the choice to go with Elias. When we arrived at the home late at night, Elias told me to leave my phone in the car. He explained that maybe I could lose it or someone I don't know could try and take it from me while I'm not looking. At first, I was confused. I simply nodded, and we got out of the car. I went with Elias into the home's backyard where the party was taking place. I glanced around the backyard and saw people engaging in various activities such as smoking, drinking, and possibly even doing drugs in small groups. Elias had encouraged me to go mingle and say hello to a few people. After a few hours, I realized I had had way too much to drink because my vision was completely foggy. After getting closer to the house, I leaned against the wall to support myself. As I did so, I noticed the time on my watch indicated that it was either midnight or 1:30 in the morning. I knew it was time to leave, so I set out to find Elias. Despite my overwhelming need to collapse, I scanned the yard for him, but I was unable to locate him or see him. When I asked a few others if they'd seen Elias, they all said they had not. I decided to call Henry to find out where he was, so I reached inside my pocket to feel for my phone, but it wasn't there. I cursed myself in the back of my mind because I realized that I had left my phone in Elias's car. It had disappeared with him. I realized there was only one way to get home, which was walking. I remembered my house wasn't too far from this house, but the night was chilly because it was fall. I thought about just asking someone else to take me home, but I didn't know anyone else who could help, so I stuck with my idea of walking home in the darkness by myself. I then got to the road and started stumbling down the street. I knew I had too many drinks because I felt lightheaded and dizzy. A few minutes later, I made it to the main area of the street and kept walking. I lazily started thinking about a bunch of different things, like why did Elias decide to leave me alone at the party, or why I decided to listen to Elias's idiotic idea of leaving my phone in his car so I couldn't call him or anyone else. I started cursing myself for being so careless with my drinking and even getting drunk when I knew I shouldn't have done that. I stopped walking on the side of the road because I was getting tired and crossed my arms over my chest tightly to keep myself warm. Then I remembered something I could do, which was hitchhiking. I held out my arm and stuck out my thumb, hoping someone could see me. I watched as a couple of cars drove past me. They wouldn't stop. As minutes ticked by, I started feeling uneasy, thinking I would have to start walking again. It was past 1 o'clock in the morning, and there were a few cars driving past me, but no one was stopping because they either didn't notice me or didn't care. I hesitated and thought about walking home again, but I realized that in my drunken state, it would be too daunting. I was still holding out my thumb when a gray truck pulled up and stopped in front of me. I smiled as I stumbled towards the vehicle. The window rolled down, and an older-looking man with a beard asked me if I needed a ride. I told him yes, and then told him where my house was before getting into the truck, feeling grateful for the ride. As we started driving down the road, the man began trying to make small talk with me, asking what happened to me. However, I was too disoriented to have an actual conversation with him, and the only things I could manage to say were low mumbling or just murmurs and groans. As we turned the corner onto my street away from the party, I started feeling uneasy for some reason. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was strange about this man. Suddenly, we drove past my house, and I told the man that we had just driven past it. I felt my gut telling me to get out, but I couldn't because I was too drunk to move. I was about to tell the man to let me out before we got too far away from my house when suddenly the man turned to me, and I noticed he had a sinister look on his face. "You know you shouldn't be drunk while you're hitchhiking because you'd make a very easy target," the man said, smirking darkly. The man reached over and started rubbing my leg. I didn't know what he was trying to do, but I knew it probably wasn't anything good. But before he could do anything else to me, we both heard a loud siren behind the car, and then a flashing red and blue light flooded the night. I realized it was the police, and I jumped for joy inside. The man panicked and stopped, unlocking the doors, which allowed me to jump out of the car. I ran as fast as I could, and the police officer rushed over to me. I told him the entire story about what happened to me. Unfortunately, nothing illegal happened per se at that point. The police officer told me that he was looking for someone in a gray truck who had apparently stolen something from a store. I'm not sure if it was the man who picked me up or someone else, but I was just glad the police officer stopped the car. A cop gave me a ride home, and I decided from then on I wouldn't get so drunk that I couldn't think straight. I now know the importance of being responsible and staying aware of my surroundings, even when having a good time. I was still in college when this happened. I went to a big party school in upstate New York. I wasn't in a sorority, but I attended a lot of the frat parties still. I had a heavy drinking phase in college, unfortunately, but I guess it's good that I got it out of my system. There was an upcoming frat party that my friends Verity and Ellie wanted to go to. I was not one to ever say no to a party unless I was already deathly hungover, and even then, I'd sometimes be known to still go out. I was living in a house off campus with 3 other girls. We were not a sorority house or team house or anything like that, just 4 friends renting a house together. I believe it was a Adam Sandler party that we were going to. The house was about 20 minutes away from campus. We pre-gamed pretty heavily at our house and then called an Uber, which we all split. On the Uber ride there, we pre-gamed some more, which was a recipe for disaster. By the time we showed up to the party, I was borderline blacked out. I barely remember the layout of that house. I'd never been to a frat party besides that night. It's weird, I have short spans of memory from that night. I vaguely remember the outside, that there were a bunch of frat guys standing out front of the house, and then I remember the DJ in the living room and the 2 beer pong tables in the kitchen. I was later told that I played beer pong with some random frat guy and ended up talking to him in a corner for a big chunk of the night. But after that, nobody knows where I went. I couldn't even tell you the last thing I remember before waking up sleeping on the grass on the side of the road. In a daze, my head was throbbing. I had to still be somewhat intoxicated. It was pitch black outside. I was laying by a bunch of trees, like a wooded area apart from the university. There wasn't much up there besides woods and the occasional little town. There were a couple of light posts further down the road, so I wasn't just laying in complete darkness. I patted down my pockets looking for my phone and had a meltdown when I realized my pockets were empty. I was also missing my crossbody bag. I had absolutely nothing on me and started to freak out. I couldn't even call for help, let alone check the time or where I was. I looked around the immediate area by where I was sleeping, nothing. My white shirt was stained with dirt, but that was the least of my worries. I started walking down the road closer to the light posts and began to realize there were no buildings in sight. I was on some completely random back road. I leaned on the light pole for a few minutes, wondering what to do. I decided I'd wait for someone to pass by and ask for help. It took a long time, though at least 20 minutes, before I noticed headlights down the road. I stepped out onto the road, waving my arms and jumping, trying to ensure I got their attention. The car slowed to a stop on the side of the road. I approached the car, and the guy inside rolled down the window. Once he asked me if I was all right. I told him I was stranded without a phone and needed a ride home. He told me to get in, and I did, making sure to let him know how much I appreciated it. He, of course, asked me about my predicament, how I found myself stranded on the side of the road. I told him I was at a party, and the next thing I remembered was waking up on the side of the road. In hindsight, I should not have said any of that. I should have been as vague as possible and not let this guy know that I got completely trashed and was vulnerable. He asked why I didn't call for help, and I told him I lost my cell phone too. I looked back at him for a second, and this was the first time I really analyzed his features. He was about 40, not the best-looking guy, with a thin goatee and a big nose. I gave him my address to put into his house as he drove. He put the address in, and then I heard him say under his breath, "Okay, here we go." I asked how far away we were, and he said about 15 minutes. That sounded about right, since the frat house was about 15 minutes from our house. I thought things would go smoothly. I'd get dropped off at the house where Ellie and Verity would be waiting for me with my belongings. But nothing can ever go that smoothly. The man spoke in a gentle voice basically the entire time. He was asking basic questions. At first, his soft voice was almost, in a weird way, off-putting, like why was he talking in an almost whisper in the car? We drove on and on for what seemed like over 15 minutes on the same road. I started to get concerned and asked him how much further we had. He didn't respond right away, so I said, "Sir," and he went, I repeated my question, and he said in his soft voice, "Not far." This wasn't right. Our house is in town, yet we were still on the same back road with nothing but trees everywhere. I started noticing in my peripheral vision that he would look at me multiple times, like he'd move his whole head to stare at me for a few seconds and then look back at the road. I was starting to feel sick. I asked him if he put the right address in, and he said yes. Then he asked, "What color underwear are you wearing?" as he put his hand on my knee and started rubbing it. I moved it away and told him in a desperate voice to please not hurt me. I just wanted to get home safe. He said, "Why would I hurt you?" After saying this, he pulled onto the grass on the side of the road and put the car in park. He was about to lean over towards me and do something, like put his arms around me, but I didn't let him. I opened the door and ran into the woods. Luckily, I was wearing my Air Forces, so I didn't have a hard time running in the woods. I ran only just enough to be out of sight from the car. When I could no longer see its headlights, I heard the man for the first time raising his voice. He yelled into the woods, "Where you at?" "I just want to." I put my hands over my mouth, not only to muffle my breathing, but because of pure fear. I waited and waited until I heard a car door slam shut and the sound of a car speeding off. I waited a few more moments before walking back to the road, confirming he was gone. I felt truly helpless. I didn't want to run into that man again, but I also needed someone else to help me. I waited just at the edge of the woods for another car to come, and eventually, one did. I saw the headlights approaching from afar, but I waited until I was sure it was a different car before jumping out and waving my arms and yelling. The car came to a stop. It was another man, a little older. I sat in the back seat. This time, I was so shaken up that I hardly spoke apart from answering whatever questions about my predicament he asked. Thankfully, this man dropped me off at the house. It was like 4 a.m. at this point. My friends were still awake waiting for me. They had my phone and my bag. They were contemplating calling the police if I didn't come back by morning. No one had any clue who I left with or how I ended up on the side of the road. The boy I was with claims he wasn't the one who left with me. In fact, there's no solid proof that I even left with anyone, but that leaves no explanation for how I ended up sleeping on the side of the road. I cut back heavily on the drinking after this night and never want to be in a situation again where I have to hitchhike. Out of the dark forest, I was hitchhiking from Liège, Germany, to Paris. He was a French man, a somewhat dirty and unshaven driver, small and shabby. He agreed to give me a ride in his car, a ride with him to Paris where I needed to pick up. My paintings were from an exhibition I had there. It was October, I was 30 years old, and he seemed about the same age. He spoke broken English, I spoke no French at all. I really didn't have a clue who this guy was. The day was mild, sunny, and blue. It was a warm and comfortable French day, a great day to hitchhike. It was around 4:30 p.m. when I met him at a gas station somewhere in France. I hopped into his little old car, happy to have scored a ride. We drove off to Paris on the main highway. After some small talk, mainly about where I'm from, he reached over my lap and opened the glove compartment. He pulled out what looked like a bunch of passports. They were passports. He handed me all four. The first was a pretty girl who was his girlfriend and had died falling off the back of his motorcycle, he said. The second was a girlfriend who had died in a car crash. He told me the third girlfriend died from a brain tumor and the fourth fell off a horse. He said, "I'm such an unlucky man." I agreed he was unlucky. The uneasiness started then and only grew as the miles rolled on. He was in possession of 4 young women's passports. Soon after showing me the passports, the man said he wanted to take a shortcut to Paris. It wasn't really a question to me. Excellent, I thought, get me out of here ASAP. I assumed we would cut through some charming French villages on secondary roads, past houses and farms, but no. Instead, we turned off onto an implausible dirt road off the main highway. Oh, I thought. Not good, but I kept silent. Why we keep quiet is a mystery, perhaps because of our dumb manners. At first, the road was out in the open through a field. We rolled over the typically vivid green French hillside until we finally reached the oncoming heavy woods. The road narrowed. It grew instantly darker as we entered the forest. The interior of the forest was creepy. The woods looked like the perfect place to hide something. I still found the woods beautiful and dreadful. It was at this point that my French driver shouted in broken English, "I don't want to speak English anymore." This was definitely not a request. Then silence, uncomfortable silence in the darkening forest. I started to feel a small trickle of adrenaline in my body. My fight or flight instinct was warming up. Communication had now officially ended, just silence. I pondered this because I knew I would surely have questions as we would get deeper and deeper into the thickening woods. I knew, though, that I wouldn't ask anything. Nothing. It was now 5 p.m., and the sun was fading fast. The woods grew darker. The driver seemed so tense, and I could tell he was in deep thought. I noticed his lips moving almost imperceptibly. They were rigid, snake-like. I myself had moved my hand to the car door handle, a movement I'm sure could not have been missed. The car was slowing down. It did not say a word. Was I going to die now? Did he have a gun? All these questions ran through my head. My life was now surreal. This was not my plan. Maybe I communicated with my captor in some secret way. Maybe I gave off some kind of male pheromone perceptible only to men. Facing off, I possessed my own rage issues, and I was not going down without a fight. That I knew. There would be no begging or cries of mercy from me, not to this. I also had my own secret store of crazy. I was big and strong at that time, rode tough through my travels, and there's no substitute for my nothing to lose stare. That is all I gave him. Something very primitive transpired between us then. I think rather quickly, in a matter of seconds, it's a sort of inner calculus as to whether one can overcome, stop, or kill the other guy or not, and all its peripheral considerations, not the least blood, gore, strength, and alas, dying. I don't think these calculations are the same when the victim is small and scared, begging and weak. I think between those two uneven people, it just becomes bloodlust, power, panic, scratching, and doom. 5:12 p.m. The car was now moving really, really slow. I entered a very strange and new place in myself. I was transformed with very little preparation, transformed into a potential killer myself, maybe. My chauffeur could read my mind, or my body language, or sense my intent, or see my hand on his dirty door handle. It was the moment of truth, and then we suddenly started to speed up. Thank God. Out of those woods. Odd how these memories have come back to me as I write this. Some memories I'm not certain of. Like, did he say he had to hit one girlfriend with a shovel because she attacked him and would not be quiet and leave him in peace? Did he really explain the 2 backpacks on the back seat? Did I not hear that on purpose? Did I later imagine those words? Did I see more passports in his glove box than the 4 he pulled out? Why didn't I say, stop the car, after the passport show? The road began to widen, and we emerged out of the dark forest into the setting sun, dark red and orange in the sky. I could hear and then see the highway. Now I saw tiny houses across the highway. I had no idea where exactly I was. The Frenchman asked me if I wanted to spend the night at his house. We could eat dinner together. A quick film of his filthy torture chamber basement ran through my head. I politely said no. My first words spoken since the order not to speak English. I sincerely think that had I broken that command and blabbered something in the woods, my story might have had a different ending. It all came down to silence. I can be silent sometimes. One needs to be to contemplate the next move. Maybe one of the faces in the passports may not have been able to spring over her nature and started to talk or beg with fear. Would that have fed the killer's darkness as evil? Who really knows? I got out at the side of the highway, and with night settling in, I watched him drive away. I never went to the police because I didn't speak French, and I thought maybe my imagination was just too damn active. I yelled something into the night sky, just wondering what the hell had just happened. It was fully dark now. I was exhausted after that little adventure and soon fell asleep on the side of the highway. The next morning, I was worried about what the new day would bring. I looked at my hands, wondering if I was still alive. Jump ahead 20 years, and I'm teaching a German business student English in a cafe on a boulevard in Liege, Germany. For whatever reason, we discussed the topic of hitchhiking, and I tell him my story. My student promptly whips out his smartphone and Googles French serial killers. Then he shows me pictures. There he was. I was shown a photo of serial killer Patrice Allegre. It was him, all those years ago, me and him on that strange ride. I had never forgotten his face. At that time, in 1990, there was a reported serial killer leaving bodies of girls on the French roadsides and highways. He was in the midst of his killing hobby back then. I had heard about a killer on the loose. My French girlfriend told me to be careful hitchhiking. I've often wondered if the murdered women, other men may have been buried in those woods we passed through slowly. I now wish I had gone to the police and have since subsequently tried. He's in jail, and they're not interested. Maybe I could have helped stop more murders back then. That's heavy on my soul. Since then, I've felt the dark light in my body. Maybe the souls of the girls escaped with me, desperate to get out of the forest. When I was 29 years old, I'd saved enough money to buy my first house. It wasn't anything special, and honestly, all things considered, it wasn't in the best neighborhood either. But I was still proud of the accomplishment nonetheless. I'd met all the nearby neighbors within the first 2 weeks I moved in. Considering the neighborhood, I was surprised to discover they all actually seemed pretty nice. A couple of them even invited me over for dinner a few times, and having lived in different apartments all my life, this wasn't really something I was used to. Of course, they weren't all like this. However, 2 houses down from the house I moved into lived a man that was probably 50 years old. Upon moving in, every other night or so, the dude would knock at my front door at some absurd hour asking for stuff. For example, the first time it happened, he asked me to find any spare bread I wasn't going to eat. Another time, he asked me if I could fill up a bucket with water because his was turned off. It was just random but somewhat understandable things like that. But I drew the line when he started asking me for money. I figured I had no obligation to be constantly meeting this guy's needs. I mean, I had pretty much just met the dude. I started opening the door to his knocks less and less, but this didn't seem to have any effect on the number of times he would show up. Fast forward to a night a few weeks later, and again, another knock. I planned to ignore it like I'd grown accustomed to doing by that point, but as I looked through the peephole, I noticed the guy looked distressed. Seeing this, I decided the right thing to do would be to open up the door. So I did. I asked him what he needed, and what he responded with was not at all the type of response I was expecting. He asked me if I could come over and show him how to use his new grill. Now, this happened around midnight, which in my opinion was an extremely odd time to start grilling. But against my better judgment, I decided I would help him. I was pretty into cooking at that point in my life and figured taking 10 minutes to show the guy how a grill worked wouldn't be the end of the world. I told him that I'd be over in a second and that I just needed to put some shoes on. He thanked me and started walking back. A couple of minutes later, I made my way over to his house. I opened some gate and walked into his backyard. It was dark, so it was hard to see, but it was clear there was no grill. On top of that, the guy was nowhere in sight, although his back door was wide open. I stuck my head inside and yelled out for the guy. "Yeah, I'm down here. I need your help getting some meat from the freezer." The muffled response came from down a set of stairs just to the left of me. I was hesitant to go down. There were no lights on down there. In fact, there wasn't a single light on throughout the whole house. I yelled down the stairs, asking him if he could turn on a light so I could see. There was silence for a few seconds. Eventually, he responded, "No, they're broken. I can't do that." I knew something was off at that point. I yelled back something like, "I think I'm just gonna go, man." I kid you not, the second after I said this, audible footsteps started sprinting up the stairs. My flight reaction kicked in immediately. I ran directly back to my house and locked the door behind me. I pulled back a set of curtains and looked out one of my windows, but I didn't see anything. I was terrified. I thought about calling the police, but decided against it, figuring I really wouldn't be able to prove anything that just happened. For the next few days, I didn't leave my house for anything except work. During those days, I never saw the guy nor did any late-night knocks occur. Exactly 1 week after it happened, I was talking with my neighbor across the street. The conversation eventually landed on what I experienced and how I was planning to move because of it. But I was just met with a look of confusion. I was then informed that no one lived in the house I was talking about. It had been abandoned for 2 years. This prompted my neighbor to call the police. However, the police would find nothing inside or around the house. I moved out a few weeks later, so that's all I know. I'm not sure if anything else came from the situation or not. I still don't know who that guy was or what he was trying to lure me into. This happened during the summer before my sophomore year in college. At that time, I was doing a lot of research for a place I could live during the coming school year that was close to campus. I found multiple good-looking apartments, but all of them were way out of my budget. I quickly figured out that if I wanted to live close to campus, I would need a roommate that could help pay each month's rent. I posted an ad on Craigslist explaining my situation, hoping someone would be interested. Not even an hour after I posted the ad, I got a response. Apparently, it was some older lady in her 70s. I was kind of expecting it to be another student from my university, but I figured it didn't really matter. As long as they were willing to pay half of the rent, I didn't really care. Plus, I didn't get any further responses in the next week, so I took the one opportunity one was given. Fast forward to the start of the school semester, and the two of us moved in. She introduced herself as Wilfred. She was short and had white hair. Although a little quiet, she seemed nice. I figured we'd get along fine, so I wasn't too worried about the coming months. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We had the occasional small talk conversation when we were both in the kitchen, but that was about it. For the most part, she would spend all her time in her bedroom. Occasionally, while I was watching TV in the living room at night, I would hear this high-pitched giggling coming through the walls. The first few times it happened, I just assumed she was on her phone or something. But then I realized I never actually heard her talking. It was just her giggling. I couldn't imagine what she was doing. Over time, things just kept getting weirder. For example, she would start coming out of her room for no other purpose than to watch me. She would stand in the kitchen or hallway just looking at me while I watched TV or made myself dinner. Needless to say, I was getting more and more uncomfortable around her. One night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. to the sound of slight knocking on my bedroom door. Not knocking like trying to get my attention, but slow, soft, and barely audible knocking. I yelled out Wilfred's name, and right as I did, the knocking stopped. I knew it was her because shortly after, I heard her same giggling followed by footsteps walking back to her room. I'd be lying if I said this didn't freak me out. I didn't have a lock on my door, so nothing was stopping her from coming into my room while I was sleeping. I didn't sleep at all the rest of that night. I had planned on confronting her about this situation the next day, but she never left her room once. Come night again, I decided to move my desk in front of my door as a makeshift barricade because, again, I didn't have a lock on my door and I did not feel comfortable having nothing stopping her from entering my room. 3 hours later, I woke up to the sound of my desk being hit by my door from someone attempting to open it. It was Wilfred. I could see her eye peeking through the crack of the slightly open door. Before I could even say anything, she started screaming and banging on my door. My desk started to give way, so I got out of bed and held the door closed myself. The screaming and banging went on for 2 more minutes. Once it finally stopped, I got up and called the police. When they arrived, I opened the door to my bedroom and my heart dropped. Every single one of the knives from our kitchen had been stabbed into the door. I was absolutely horrified, but I tried to compose myself. I briefly explained the situation to the 2 officers that arrived. I also told them which room Wilfred was in. She would provide a struggle in being detained, but they would ultimately take her away. The next month, I moved to another apartment, this time with some actual students from my university. I still don't understand what made Wilfred do what she did. My best guess is she had some severe untreated condition she wasn't on medication for, but then again, maybe not. Maybe she seriously intended to use those knives on me in my sleep. But because I took the precaution of pushing my desk in front of my door, I luckily didn't have to find out. This experience happened to me when I was only 9 years old. Being that it was so long ago, I don't remember every small detail, but I'll do my best to keep everything as accurate as possible. Back then, I lived in a considerably remote area and the US neighboring houses were a good half-mile apart. Therefore, while my family had met a couple of our neighbors, many of them were complete strangers. This included the resident of the house to the left of ours. I don't remember his name, but it was an elderly man that lived there. He was creepy, to say the least. All of the windows on his house were spray painted so that no one could see inside, and his whole yard was completely overgrown. I know all this because every Monday through Friday, I had to walk past his house to get home from school. Every time I did this, the man would either be standing on his porch watching me or trying to make conversation with me as I walked by. It got to the point where I dreaded walking home from school just because I'd have to walk past him. But this wasn't even the worst of it. Maybe once or twice a month, the guy would make the half-mile walk to our house in the middle of the night. He would then shine a flashlight into the window of my room. I knew it was the same guy too because one of the times, I witnessed him walking down the road towards our house. Looking back, this was 100% extremely alarming behavior, but at the time, I thought the best way of handling it was just to ignore it. Therefore, I didn't tell my parents about it. I also remember reasoning that my bedroom was on the 2nd floor, so it's not like he was able to see much of inside my room anyway. Skip to a summer night in that same year, and I was once again woken up by the light of a flashlight shining in my room. This time, it was followed by a subtle thud sound against the wall. It felt like my heart had stopped. The only thing running through my mind in that moment was how it sounded exactly like a ladder being propped up against the side of the house. Not long later, my suspicions would be confirmed. A knocking sound rang out from the glass of the window. I looked over and was met with the smiling face of the man gesturing me to open the window. But no. I screamed and ran to my parents' bedroom. I desperately explained to them how the neighbor was outside my window. They went in my room, but of course, he was gone by that point. The worst part is they didn't even believe me, chalking it up to me seeing things. Therefore, the police were never called. But even now, as an adult, I know exactly what I saw. I try not to think about the intentions he had towards my 9-year-old self. I never saw him again after that. In fact, not even a week after the occurrence, his house had a for sale sign up next to it, which to me serves as further proof that it was him. I've lived in many different places since then, and not one neighbor comes even slightly close to how creepy that man was. My two kids, Audrey and Radley, are twins. They're 6 years old. A year ago, we were living at our old house, but something happened that led to us moving. It's a long, awful story. I lived in my old house for 4 years. My wife Louisa and I got married while I was living there, and we had our kids there too. The neighborhood was slowly changing, and not for the better, but even still, we originally planned on staying in that house for the foreseeable future until this happened. We were a corner house, and the house behind us on the intersecting road was covered by a bunch of tall trees and bushes, so we hardly ever saw those neighbors. Our neighbor on the right, however, his name was Farley, had just moved there less than a year ago. At the time, I had only ever spoken with him a couple of times. Both times I could hardly understand what he said because of his heavy accent, and he just overall didn't seem like the friendliest guy. Two of his windows overlooked our backyard. There wasn't much privacy, but whatever rooms the two windows were that overlooked the backyard, I had never seen the lights on in either of them. So I always assumed it was an unused guest room or something of that nature. One day in the summertime, Audrey and Radley were playing in the backyard in their blow-up pool and with their water guns while I was outside doing yard work. There came a certain point where I was walking towards the detached garage, and then I saw Farley next door at his window. For a second, only half a second after noticing him, did he turn and walk away from the window. It was slightly odd for sure, but I left it alone. Later that day, as the sun was going down, the kids went back outside to play again. It was a very hot day, so they went back in their blow-up pool while Louisa and I were in the kitchen as she was making dinner. Then the kids' laughter went quiet for a while, and suddenly Radley came inside and said there was a flashing light from the neighbor's window. I had to follow him into the backyard to ask him to show me what he was talking about. He pointed to one of Farley's upstairs windows that overlooked the backyard, and he said there was a white light that kept coming from that window. I immediately assumed the worst and asked the twins if it looked like a camera flash. They both said yes. I told them it was time to dry off and come inside. So I helped them dry themselves and then brought them in where I went to tell Louisa about this. She immediately assumed the worst, just like me. She said I should go next door and knock on Farley's door. So I did, but when I did, he never answered the door. His car was even in the driveway, so he had to be home. After a few attempts at knocking and ringing the bell, I gave up and went back to my house. I told Louisa he wasn't opening up, which made what the kid said seem even more credible. While we couldn't prove that the white light the kids were seeing was a camera flash, it sure did sound like it, and it was concerning to hear. Some time passed, maybe even weeks, before one night when Louisa and I were in the bedroom, we heard our side gate being quietly opened and closed outside. Louisa wanted me to go check outside, so I stepped out into the backyard and looked around. I had on all the lights as I searched. I found nothing and nobody, but I noticed the lights in Farley's backyard were on. I went over to look over the fence into his yard, and I nearly jumped out of my skin when he came up to the fence from the other side and asked if I needed something. I asked him if he'd seen or heard anyone sneaking through our yard. He said no. I took this time to also ask him bluntly if he had, by chance, been watching my kids, as they thought someone was at his window taking pictures of them playing in the pool. His reaction to this was a bit suspicious. He acted overly offended to my asking this, almost yelling at me for such an accusation. Again, without proof, I couldn't, nor did I want to, start issues with a neighbor. I apologized and went back inside. Louisa was not happy about this, saying he's full of it. The next incident didn't happen until another few weeks later. This time it was in the middle of the night when we were asleep. I woke up to Louisa shaking me in a panic. I looked around the room, confused at first, but then when I heard the kids screaming from their room, I exploded from the bed and ran downstairs to the kids' room. Radley was awake and crying, and I found out a few seconds later that his crying and screaming had awoken Audrey, who was crying and screaming in reaction to him. Radley said there was someone outside the window a second ago, and there was a camera flash from the window. I got goosebumps, but I also felt my blood begin to boil. All I could say was, "What did he look like?" He said he didn't see. I brought the kids up to our room to sleep in the bed with us. With the lights off, I peeked out our bedroom window to look across at Farley's unlit house next door. I looked at each window of his house, and I found him. He, just like me, was peeking out one of the upstairs windows in that same room that overlooks the backyard. I stormed outside next door and rang his doorbell like 15 times. He never opened his door. I did call the police just to make a report on Farley. That way, if any future reports were made about him from other people, maybe the police department would look into him. I never saw him again. Sometimes I'd sit out front, waiting to see him outside, but he'd clearly avoid coming outside when I'd be out there. Because of this, we ended up moving within a month to a new house in a different but nearby town, which has proven to be a better place to raise the kids anyway. About 3 months ago, I moved into an apartment with 2 other women so I could attend college. There's a list of things that make the building we live in not that great. For example, most apartment rooms face the corridor where people from the same floor as you will constantly walk left and right to get in or out of the building. So if you keep your windows open, anyone pacing outside can see into your room. But considering I spend most of my time at college, and the girls I live with and most of the neighbors are really nice, the things on that list don't really bother me that much. A few nights ago, while getting ready to go to bed, I could hear music playing from somewhere, mostly pop songs from the 2000s. Since we live in a student-friendly city full of frat houses and the like, I thought nothing of it. There were probably a bunch of parties going on, and the sound was coming from one of them. Or maybe it was just some drunk friends listening to it on the street. I got into bed and let a random video play on my phone so I could fall asleep, as I often do. But as I was starting to doze off, I started to hear drilling noises. At first, I thought I was just sleepy and hearing things, or maybe it was coming from my phone. But I paused the video and listened closely. There was definitely someone using a drill somewhere nearby. I got up and walked around the apartment, feeling confused. It was around 10:30 p.m., so there was no way that someone could be working still. The sound was louder at my bedroom window, so I opened it to check and quickly realized that it was coming from the neighboring apartment, the one that's closest to my window. At that moment, I realized that music was also coming from there. No one lives in that specific apartment, so my confusion only grew. But then I figured maybe someone had planned to rent it, talked it over with the landlord, and he ordered for something in it to be fixed. Still, the fact that they were doing it so late into a Thursday felt really strange. I went back to trying to sleep, but they wouldn't stop making noise. I was texting a friend and eventually started complaining about it, sending him audios and even a video directed at the window that all the noise was coming from. He said I should call the police because there was no way it was legal for someone to be doing this, especially in a building full of apartments. I decided against it since I just wanted to get some rest, and it was already past midnight by then. I forced myself to sleep through the drilling sounds, but a little past 1 o'clock in the morning, I woke up again, this time to hammering. Feeling stressed, but not enough to take action just yet, I tried to sleep once more, only to wake up again. This time, I didn't even check what time it was. I was totally fed up, so I just put on a robe and made my way to confront whoever it was. The window to the apartment was open, so I decided to talk to those people from there. The window was located above the stairs, though, so I would have to go down a few steps to get into view, and I'd look even shorter being seen from there. But that was the last thing on my mind. As soon as I got to the window, I felt most of the courage leave me. In that room, there were 4 men who all seemed to be around their 30s or 40s, and they all stopped whatever they were doing to look at me. Now only the song coming from the radio could be heard, and somehow it felt chilling to have all those other noises stop so abruptly. Even though that's everything I wanted just seconds earlier, I definitely didn't want to be the one thing these 4 men were focused on. Another thing that bothered me, but I didn't think about until the next day, was those men's peculiar choice of music. It just felt creepy to realize that middle-aged men were listening to stuff that teenagers or even preteens would be listening to. Anyway, none of them looked shocked to see me. They just had puzzled looks. Remembering why I was there in the first place, I said, "Excuse me, it's pretty late and most people here have work early in the morning. If it's not too much to ask, can you guys do this some other time?" Now, mind you, I'm a pretty short and puny 19-year-old who didn't even think to put on something other than a robe. So when 2 of those 40-something-year-old men came to the window and towered over me, looking up and down at my body almost like predators, I froze up and felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. They were both sweaty and had their mouths agape, and one of them had a hammer that looked quite heavy in his hand. They started smiling in a sick, twisted way, and I felt a sudden urge to throw up. Extremely unsettled, I started slowly making my way back to my apartment, not taking my eyes off the men, feeling like they might try to grab me. When I got to the last step of the stairs and close enough to the window, as soon as I was out of their view, I dashed to my front door, got inside, and locked it. One of the girls who lives with me was out of town that night, and I presumed the other one was asleep since she hadn't seen my text on our group chat asking them if anyone had moved into that apartment. I got back into my room and didn't hear any tools again. In reality, even the radio seemed to have been turned off. I wasn't really sure how to feel about that because now I wasn't angry, just disgusted and creeped out. I know I should have called the cops by then, but I was just too stressed to deal with that any longer. Checking the time, it was about 2:15 now. I got into bed again, tricking myself into thinking I wasn't scared, just craving some sleep. Eventually, I passed out. I woke up in the middle of the night again. This time it was around 3 o'clock, and I could hear no sounds coming from the apartment. Everything was quiet, and that quickly started to bother me. It was too quiet. I had to have heard or felt something in order to wake up. The silence was making me uneasy, and I had a feeling that someone might have been on the other side of my closed window. I tried not to think about it, but I couldn't get a peaceful sleep after that. The next morning, as I was going out, I went past the same window and noticed that it was closed. It was as if this previous night had never even happened. But I asked the girl who was home with me if she heard anything. She said she had woken up several times during the night but couldn't get up and do something about it due to sleep paralysis. Either way, that confirmed I wasn't delusional, those people really were there. But then how did they have the keys to the building and that apartment? Why did it seem like they didn't want to be seen during the day? What were they thinking of doing to me or maybe any passerby? It's been a week now, and thankfully I haven't seen those men again. Still, I have no idea who they were or what they were doing, and I'm honestly scared to even think about the possibility that they might come back or still be lurking around. I live in a pretty basic suburban town on Long Island, New York. My girlfriend Valerie and I recently started renting a small house, perfect for 2 to 4 people. We have a decent-sized backyard, and our house is on a very quiet street. One side of our house has a water drainage basin, as the county calls it, which is just a bunch of trees surrounding a sump. On the other side is our neighbor Neil, who lives with his wife. They're a bit older, in their 60s, and quiet. Then directly across the street is a little patch of woods that's in front of another water drainage basin. So for people who like privacy out front, our house is perfect. But then there's the backyard. Neil's house is blocked off by some bushes that the landlord planted years ago, so besides the house directly behind us over the fence, there are no other houses that could see into the yard. However, that one house looking into our backyard was all it took to genuinely make Valerie and I uncomfortable. As I'm writing this, it's currently the fall, so we've been doing fall cleanup the past few weeks in the front and backyard. I started noticing that any time we were out there, there were these 2 people standing at the upstairs window of the house behind us. It was a middle-aged man and woman. When I'd look up to that window, they'd keep looking and watching me. It got really uncomfortable to the point we pretended not to notice it, but we could only stomach doing this for so long. The leaves kept falling day by day, and the fall cleaning would need to continue. Valerie wouldn't want to be in the yard anymore because she was getting so creeped out at those 2 people who would watch us out the window without fail. So one foggy day while raking, I looked up at the window and once again, the 2 were standing at the big rectangular window. I decided to wave at them to see if they'd wave back. After a few seconds of smiling and waving, they didn't move. No reaction, but I could feel their stares and I could see their eyeballs looking at me. I turned away from the window and tried to continue raking, but after sneaking a peek back at the window a couple of minutes later and seeing them still there, I felt too awkward and weird being out there. I went inside. Valerie said we should go over and introduce ourselves. At first, I was hesitant about that, but I was persuaded to walk around the block with her to that house and ring the bell. We expected one of those people at the window to answer the door, but instead, the door cracked open just enough to see half of a person's head. It didn't look like either of those people who were always at the window. It was also super dark in the house to the point that it looked incredibly ominous and uncanny staring at half of that person's face. This guy looked a lot younger, like in his 22-year-old. Valerie and I tried to be friendly and introduce ourselves. The guy seemed very closed off though and not interested in speaking. He had a very, "what do you need" type of attitude about him. When I asked if he lives with anyone else here, like his parents, he said no. I mentioned the man and woman who were always at the window upstairs, and the guy on the other side of the door said he doesn't know who I'm talking about. Valerie and I felt really unsettled, so we just left. But weirdly, as we walked down the walkway back to the sidewalk, I noticed the guy behind the door was still peering half of his face through the cracked open door. I'm sure he watched us walk away until we were out of sight. That interaction was weirder and creepier than we were expecting. When we got back home, I went upstairs to our room. The upstairs of our house is only our master bedroom and the bathroom. It has 2 windows. One of the windows looks over to that house over the fence. I looked out the window to see those 2 people looking out the window again, and even at this distance, I felt like they were staring right at me. I shut the blinds and went down to tell Valerie. We agreed it was time to plant some arborvitaes to block their window from view. The only problem is it's already the fall, and it's too late to plant any kind of trees. We have to make it through winter. After a few days of not looking outside the bedroom window or going into the backyard, one night we heard a strange knocking sound from downstairs. I told Valerie to wait in bed while I went downstairs. The knocking got louder, and I quickly discovered it wasn't the sound of knocking on one of the doors, but rather on the glass of one of the backyard windows. The blinds of it were, of course, shut because we didn't want those creepy people looking into our living room at night. I approached it, and yes, it was 100% a fist knocking on the glass. I considered saying, "Who's there?" but I froze, and I was too scared. Instead, I flicked on the backyard light, and then the knocking stopped. I didn't even want to look out the window or door. I kept the light on and then went back upstairs to my room where I told Valerie about the creepy knocking. But I claimed that I chased whoever it was away. I exaggerated in fear of sounding like a coward. I also didn't want her to worry. We both imagined it to have been something to do with that house though. Nothing has happened since, but I'll have to update throughout the winter. Update: it's been 2 weeks, and we haven't seen those people at the window ever since. But last night, we heard yelling and screaming from that house. I had to open our window, and it became clear there were muffled yells coming from that house. The fact that we heard it through 2 sets of closed windows just goes to show how loud the yelling was. Then, out of nowhere, it just stopped and went quiet. We almost called the police, but ultimately didn't. I'll update again if anything else happens, but we're really getting creeped out here now. My childhood was normal and nothing out of the ordinary. 2 middle-class, hard-working parents just getting by in a nice city, and then of course, me and my little brother. He's 6 years younger than me, and he was at my grandma's house when this happened. My mom was at work, working a double shift, and my father was also working. He was a truck driver, so oftentimes he would spend weeks away from the house. My mom also worked a lot to cope with the fact that my father was always gone. I think it made us all a little bit sad sometimes, but really, our family was very close and we always had a great time together when we were able to finally hang out. Sometime during the night, it wasn't too late yet, but definitely starting to get dark. My mom wasn't going to be home for a few more hours, and I was getting pretty bored with nothing to do. I was pacing back and forth through the house, just trying to figure out how to cure my boredom. I sat down on the couch and began looking for something to watch on TV, but nothing was catching my eye. Shortly after, I went and grabbed my PS4 from my bedroom so I could play Madden football out in the living room since the TV was twice as big as mine. As I was hooking up my PlayStation, I felt something weird inside. As soon as I looked up, there was a face smothered in the window right in front of me, staring directly at me. I froze and screamed. Then the man also started screaming. He started yelling for help and to let him inside, just over and over. I had no idea who he was or what he was doing, but he was practically begging and screaming at the top of his lungs. I couldn't move a muscle because I was just so scared. Sounds weird, but I almost let him in despite me being that scared. I was just unsure of what to do. He was a big, scary man, but he appeared to be in danger. Thankfully, my mom pulled into the driveway as this was happening. I was so relieved to see her, but also terrified that the man might try to hurt her. He stopped like a deer in headlights, and my mom yelled at him to leave, and he did. Thankfully, my mom called the cops when she got inside. When they showed up, the man was sitting across the street on the curb in front of a foreclosed house. The cops found him there and asked him questions. He stuck with his story, though, and said that a group of men in ski masks tried to kidnap him and that they beat him senseless. For some reason, I just didn't believe that. The cop didn't really seem to either, to be honest, but there was nothing the officer could do technically. We later found out that the man was our new neighbor, and he had just bought that house that was foreclosed right across from us. It was a good thing that my mom showed up like an hour before I expected her to that night. That guy still lives next to my parents, and I lived there for a few more years after this incident. He never necessarily bothered us again after that, but man, he was a creeper. We had to live by his word and take what he said as the truth. Even though it seemed unlikely, we had no choice but to accept it. Nothing outlandish happened with him after this, but there were times I was very uncomfortable by his presence. He used to smile and wave at me whenever I walked past his house, and he always seemed to be outside watching when I got off the school bus. There were also times I heard him having full-on conversations with himself, and I swear I even saw him hitting himself in the head while doing so a few times. He liked to randomly scream in the middle of the night like bloody murder. There was definitely something wrong with him, so we always did our best to keep our distance. My dad really disliked him, probably even more than my mother and I. Violence really was not a thing in our neighborhood, and I mean that literally. So his story was just weird. The last thing I want to mention is when I saw his face the first time, he wasn't cut up or bleeding like he was when the police found him. I genuinely believe he did that to himself to make himself look like a victim. It sounds crazy, but I know there are people out there crazy enough to do that. One day when I was only 17 or so, my older sister and I were hanging outside together in the backyard. Our mom was probably upstairs reading or cleaning or something. My dad wasn't there, and I don't know where he was, probably work or something. I was on my phone, just scrolling through Instagram, lying down on the trampoline. My sister Ava was on the swing set, probably just doing the same thing I was doing. We would occasionally say something to each other about the videos we saw on our For You page, and we would send them to each other and laugh or whatever. Until we were interrupted by our neighbor Bella. We weren't super close with her, but my parents were, and my mother and she got along very well. "Hey guys, come here," she said, standing in her backyard where the fence met the middle of our property lines. We confusingly walked over to her as we had no idea what she wanted, but we knew to respect our elders, so we had to see what she was calling us for. She told us that we needed to go inside and get our mom and that she already called the police. What are you talking about?" my sister asked. "Just trust me. No time to explain right now. Please, just do as I say, guys," said Bella. "You guys are in danger. Run," she said. "Someone dangerous is lurking around your front yard." We reluctantly but also quickly scattered inside after that. We told our mom, and she looked outside, and there was a man on our front doorstep. I didn't recognize him at first as his head was shaved completely bald, but it was our old neighbor. Long story short, a few weeks before this, our neighbor was arrested for killing his wife and daughter, which I didn't know at this point, by the way. I'll get back to that later. My mom saw who it was and ordered us to run up to her room and to lock the door and to only open it if she asks, so we did. We were terrified, but we had to listen to our mom. We ran upstairs and we were waiting. My sister was crying, and I was trying to calm her down. Just by how freaked out Mom was, we both knew something was very wrong, and we were dying to know what was happening. After a few more minutes, our mom screamed and we heard glass shattering. Luckily, She was close to the stairs already, and she was able to get to the room with us before the man grabbed her. We locked the door and put a dresser in front of it to buy us some time. This man was screaming like nobody's business that he was going to kill us and pounding on the door for over 5 minutes. Suddenly, it stopped. We heard police sirens in the distance, and the man tried to run away. The cops almost had a shootout with him, but after some screaming and threatening, he finally subdued and was taken back to prison. So, this guy we're talking about is named Brian. He was charged with at least 2 counts of first-degree murder for killing his family. Like I said earlier, it was said that he escaped prison about 2 hours before this, and he wanted to come back to get revenge on my family. He was convinced that my father was the reason he got arrested. Brian thought he was going to walk away scot-free for killing his family, but he was under the impression that my dad snitched him out somehow. I'm not sure why he thinks that, as I don't know the whole story. My father won't talk to me about it, not that it matters anyway. I guess my mom and dad didn't tell me or my sister about what happened next door at first, but they said they were planning on it soon. They just didn't want us to freak out, supposedly. But that's about all I can get out of my dad about everything. Not even my mom knows the full story, unless she's lying to us. My parents probably thought there was no urgency to tell us what happened next door since he was locked away in prison at the time. But somehow, he escaped and was looking for revenge. Hopefully, they have him under control in there this time. It was personal, and he escaped just to try and murder us. My boyfriend and I used to live in a small house that we were renting at the time. We were young and it was our first place, so we needed something affordable. We found a place for just $700. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 900 square foot house. It was in a really rough part of town, but we thought if we minded our business, kept our noses down, and stayed alert, that we'd be fine. It was nothing fancy at all, but it was still more than what we needed. We both had jobs, only being paid $10 to $15 an hour, and we were both also full-time college students. So we were out of the house more than we were home, especially my boyfriend. He worked as a garbage man and got lots of overtime. He would get to work around 7 a.m. and sometimes wouldn't be home until 7:30 or 8 o'clock. Whereas I, on the other hand, worked at a salon for a new and upcoming small local business. I was paid under the table there, so it helped with taxes and the lack of hours I was working. My boyfriend, whose name is Arnold, by the way, took night classes for college. He was studying law but later changed to business after just a year. That's not really the point, but the point I'm trying to make is that he was hardly ever home, mostly to eat and sleep. Even on the weekends, he worked a part-time job for extra money. I would always have dinner ready for him every night so he could eat before class and so we could spend what little time we had together every night before he would have to leave at 9 o'clock for 4 hours. I would usually be sleeping by the time he got home. When Arnold returned home, I was nowhere to be found. Of course, he freaked out and filed a missing persons report after blowing up my phone and me not replying for over 30 minutes. It wasn't until 2 days later that Arnold ran into our neighbor while getting the mail, and for some reason, he thought that there was a possibility that he might know something. Arnold admitted that he didn't really think he did, but he was trying everything he could at first by asking anyone any kind of questions he could think of. He asked him when he saw me last and stuff like that. This is where things get much crazier. My boyfriend thought he was acting really weird, and way weirder than usual, so he called the cops on him. But since they didn't have any proof or probable cause, and they didn't have a warrant nor consent to search the house, it didn't go very far. Arnold had this very serious feeling inside that something was wrong with this guy and that he had something to do with me going missing. He literally snuck into our neighbor's house later that night after he saw him leave. The house was disgusting and was honestly as bad as some of the worst hoarders episodes I've ever seen. He looked all around the house and was yelling for me in case I was in there. He had no clue if I really was, but I finally heard him yelling for me and I screamed as best as I could from downstairs with the duct tape covering my mouth. He didn't hear me yelling until he started to search downstairs for me. Yes, the man kidnapped me and did unspeakable things to me for days. Arnold got me out of there and we called the police. Of course, we lied a bit so Arnold didn't get charged with breaking and entering. We told police that Arnold heard me screaming down there and that he rushed in here to save me and that we called the police right away. We never had any issue with Arnold getting any charges, thankfully. I don't really like to talk about how he kidnapped me and how it all went down. It makes me too uncomfortable. I'll explain it briefly, though. While Arnold was gone that night and I was sleeping, the man broke in and managed to knock me out cold by beating me half to death and dragged me next door in the middle of the night without anyone noticing. This story is very real, and what happened to me is still something I live with and sticks with me to this very day. He used to stare at me like a creeper every day, and we always thought he was strange, but never did we think it would come to this. I'm pretty sure this is literally every woman's worst nightmare. As a child growing up in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the local playground was a place of joy and laughter, a haven where my friends and I could escape the world's worries. But one summer day, that all changed. It started out like any other day, with sun shining brightly overhead and the sound of children's laughter filling the air, but as we played on the swings and climbed the jungle gym, a sense of unease began to settle over us. It was subtle at first, a feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond the edge of our vision. But as the afternoon wore on, the feeling grew stronger, until it felt as though we were being stalked by some unseen presence. As we ventured deeper into the playground, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. And then, as we reached the old abandoned slide at the far end of the playground, we saw it, a figure, dark and shadowy, lurking among the rusted metal. With a cry of terror, we turned and fled from the playground, our hearts pounding in our chests as we raced home. But even as we reached the safety of our house, we could still feel the eyes of the creature watching us from the darkness, its malevolent presence lingering in the air like a foul stench. In the days that followed, the playground became a place of dread, its once cheerful atmosphere replaced by an aura of fear and mistrust. And though we never spoke of what we had seen that day, the memory of the haunted playground would stay with us forever, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the borders of our reality. As a child, I always found attics to be mysterious places, filled with forgotten treasures and hidden secrets. But what I discovered in the attic of my childhood home would forever change my perception of those dusty, cobweb-covered spaces. It all started on a lazy summer afternoon, when my parents decided it was time to clean out the attic and rid of the clutter that had accumulated over the years. As we climbed the creaky stairs and pushed open the heavy attic door, a wave of nostalgia washed over me, mingled with a sense of trepidation at what we might find hidden in the shadows. The attic was a labyrinth of old boxes and forgotten relics, with dusty furniture and forgotten memories scattered among the cobwebs. As we began to sift through the detritus of years gone by, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that some unseen presence lurked just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. And then, as I reached the far corner of the attic, I saw it, a small, nondescript box tucked away behind a pile of old blankets. Curiosity getting the better of me, I reached out and opened the box, revealing its contents to the dim light of the attic. Inside were photographs old and yellowed with age, depicting scenes from another time. But as I looked closer, I realized that these were no ordinary photographs. They were images of my family, taken long before I was born, in a house that looked eerily similar to the one we were currently in. As I flipped through the photographs, a sense of unease settled over me, as if I was peering into a past that had been intentionally forgotten. And then, as I reached the bottom of the box, I found a photograph that sent a chill down my spine, a picture of a young boy standing in front of the same attic door, his eyes wide with fear. It was then that I realized the truth. The attic was haunted by the spirits of those who had come before, trapped in a liminal space between the past and the present. As I looked around at the dusty relics of a bygone era, I knew that I would never be able to forget the horrors that lurked within the forgotten attic of my childhood home. This happened when I was a young child, maybe around 7 years old. My parents had me late. My two older siblings are both at least 10 years older than me. I was woken up in the middle of the night by a commotion downstairs. It was my parents. I cracked my door open and heard them freaking out about something, though I wasn't sure what it was. I went to the stairway and stood at the top, calling down, "Mom, Dad." My mom came to the bottom of the stairs and said to me, "Go back to bed." I listened without asking any questions. I could tell they were stressed about something, though. I tried to go back to sleep when I heard the front door downstairs slam shut, followed by dead silence. I presumed they had left the house, but wasn't sure why. Either way, I listened to my mom and went back to sleep. I woke up again to sounds downstairs. It was the sound of the front door closing and then footsteps, but no talking. Naturally, I assumed they were back home and just being quiet so they wouldn't wake me up. I heard occasional steps and thuds from downstairs, drawers and cabinets being opened and closed, and I thought for sure I heard the fridge opening too. I thought it was my older brother Jethro. He's 10 years older than me and was already driving at the time, so him getting home late and rummaging through the fridge wasn't abnormal at all. These are all things I was telling myself, logical explanations for what I was hearing. Eventually, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, getting louder and closer until they reached the top and made their way to my door. My door quietly and slowly opened. I didn't sit up or move. I just had my eyes open, facing the door as I was still lying down. There weren't any lights on outside of my room, so whoever was walking around was doing so in the dark. All I saw was a black mass at my doorway, resembling the shape of someone's head. I said every name, starting from Jethro to Mom to Dad, then I just asked, "Who's there?" They didn't reply, they just closed the door. I was left there, confused but mildly creeped out. I heard footsteps going downstairs. I was convinced it was my dad, now just coming to check on me after getting home, though I wasn't sure why he was ignoring me. I didn't hear anything from downstairs for a while. Curiosity got the better of me, and I went downstairs in the dark. I kept all the lights off as I approached the kitchen and froze at the doorway, noticing a tall figure standing right in the middle of the kitchen. I said, "Dad," assuming it was him based on the size of the person. A deep voice said, "Go back upstairs." I ran back up the stairs to my room, closed the door, and jumped under the covers. All I was thinking was why my dad's voice sounded like that. The reality of a stranger being in the house didn't dawn on my innocent little mind until a little later when I heard the front door opening and a commotion from downstairs again, voices of my parents. I went to the top of the stairway again and was shocked to see I was still awake. I asked what happened, and they told me that Jethro had a little accident but was going to be fine. I found out a month later that he had gotten into a car accident, driving in conditions he shouldn't have been driving in. My parents had gotten a call from the hospital and rushed to see him first thing, leaving me to sleep. I asked my dad if he had come in my room before, and that was when I learned that they had been gone for hours. My mom started freaking out, yelling at my dad because he had neglected to lock the door when they rushed out of the house. Me telling my parents about the person at my bedroom door and in the kitchen caused my dad to search the house with his gun and my mom to call the police. The last thing I remember was being asked by a police officer to give my story. My parents tell me they felt like morons having to explain to the cops that they left me alone and left the door unlocked. I don't think anything of value was stolen, even though whoever broke into the house clearly didn't have intentions of harming me. Having a complete stranger in your house is already a terrifying ordeal. Now imagine going through that at 7 years old. It was around 2012 to 2013. My brother was about 6 or 7 at the time, and we had just moved into a new house to be closer to school and for cheaper rent. It was a pretty nice house, all things considered. It even had a cozy fireplace for the winter. Anyway, my brother was really into Batman and had this Batman car that, if a button was pressed, made noises and lit up. It was basically his favorite toy, so he played with it often. Then one afternoon, he came inside from playing out back and told us he found something. Naturally, my mom and I asked what it was. It was a picture of a young boy, in the form of one of those tags you get if your parents paid extra for school photos. The picture was dirty and full of wear and tear, even to the point you couldn't see the year it was taken. We thought, okay, some parent lost their kid's picture, no big deal. Then my brother said something that confused me. "That's Magnus," he said. I looked at him with a facial expression that basically asked him to repeat himself. He did. He pointed at the picture and said, "This is Magnus. He's my friend." I slowly nodded my head as if I knew who he was talking about. The main reason this confused me is because my brother didn't make friends easily, and he had no friends that I knew of. This Magnus only came up once we had moved. I shrugged it off and figured he'd made friends with the next-door neighbors or something, and he somehow got the school picture as a keepsake. That night, around 2 a.m., when everyone in the house was asleep, I woke up to my brother talking. Naturally, annoyed, I walked into his room to tell him to go to bed or else he'd wake up our parents. It was weird because when I walked into his room, he was sitting up straight in his bed as if he was actually talking to someone and not just to himself or his toys. I told him to go to bed and went to bed myself. A couple of days later, my mom was talking to me about my brother and asked if I'd seen him get up at night. I said no, I'd woken up to him talking a few nights ago, but that was it. Why? She said he had been acting weird, but as usual, we both shrugged it off as him being a kid. Now, in my room, my bed was right across from my door. This meant if I turned over, I could see into the hallway right in front of me. One night, I woke up to use the bathroom, and since I was, and still am, very afraid of the dark, I left the hallway light on, knowing my dad would turn it off once he got up. I'd probably be asleep by then. I was lying in my bed, facing my door, when a sudden noise made me jump. It was my brother's damn Batman car making noises. I got up to tell my brother that he shouldn't be up this late playing. But when I got into his room, he was asleep in his bed, with the toy across the room on the floor still making noise. I walked over to it to turn it off and was finally able to go back to sleep. However, the following days, my brother wouldn't stop talking about Magnus. It was honestly starting to freak me out, so I went over to the neighbors' houses to the right and left of us. One house didn't even have kids, and the other was vacant. This started to worry me, but my dad said it was probably just an imaginary friend he came up with. I went along with it since I couldn't think of any other explanation. Almost every night, one of us, my mom, dad, or sister would say we heard my brother's toy making noise and had to go into the room to turn it off. I explained that I had to do it as well and once again brought up my brother talking to someone. One night, my dad swore up and down that the toy was probably motion activated. But when we bought it, there was no advertisement for motion activation. My sister and I were so unnerved by it that we started to sleep in my room together. I'm glad we did, otherwise, I'd probably write this off as a bad dream. My sister and I were talking, trying to keep each other calm and in good spirits, until we heard the dreaded noise of my brother's toy. We both looked toward my open door and into my brother's room, which was right across from mine. Our expressions turned to horror as we saw my brother's toy rolling past the door all on its own. We screamed and ran to our parents' room. They got mad at our brother, saying it was a cruel joke to play on us as we were already freaked out. What he said sent chills down my spine. It wasn't me. Magnus wanted to play. That night, the toy went into the trash, batteries taken out and all. My sister and I were relieved until the next day when my brother had the toy again. My parents accused him of getting it out of the trash, to which he responded, "Magnus got it for me." The toy was broken into small pieces and thrown away for the final time. My brother was obviously upset, but our parents got him a new Batman figurine, and everything was fine. It wasn't until about a week later, when we all felt that everything was okay now and that Magnus was gone, that something happened. My mom was cooking chicken breasts on the countertop with the George Foreman grill. She had come into the living room to ask us something, and then we all jumped as we heard a crash in the kitchen. We went in there to see the George Foreman grill halfway across the kitchen, as if it had been thrown. My mom swore it was nowhere near the edge, and my dad had no explanations. Nothing happened afterward, and we moved out about a year later. But to this day, I wonder if my brother's imaginary friend Magnus wasn't imaginary. When I was just 9, we moved to a new house in a different town. I was entering a new elementary school as a 5th grader, which is always tough starting out. It was a bit awkward, as all the kids already knew each other, and I was just some random kid entering the scene. In my elementary school, you were made to sit with the kids from your class during lunch. I remember it being really awkward the first few days. Kids are extremely judgmental around that age, and I was judged as the new kid, making it more difficult to make new friends. But during those initial days of being the new kid on the block, I actually met a few of the kids on the block. One of the kids was Roy, who went to a private school, so we went to different schools. We met while I was biking down the street, and he asked if I had just moved into the house on the corner. We started hanging out from there. Then, a few days later, I met Hank. Hank actually rang the bell one day and asked my parents for me. I was confused when my parents called me to the door and introduced me to him. He said he lived down the block and wanted to know if I liked video games. Of course, I said yes, and he invited me over to his house to play Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas. I didn't have that game but really wanted it, so I said yes. We walked to his house, which was literally the corner house at the opposite end of the block. Right away, I felt like the house looked less nice than every other house on the block. It was the same size as most, but it just looked run down and not taken care of. There was no grass. The front yard was just two big patches of dirt with a walkway cutting through them to the front door. We entered the house, and it was equally disheveled inside. It was like a house of hoarders, with boxes and junk everywhere in every room. He led us to the basement, which smelled like 15 cats lived down there. Weirdly enough, there didn't seem to be any pets. The basement was a pigsty. It may have been the messiest room in the house. We sat on this brown leather couch placed right in front of the TV. He had a GameCube and PS2. He booted up San Andreas, and we played the two-player mode. It was actually fun, and in that moment, I thought I was going to like Hank and would want to be friends with him. Eventually, I wanted to go home, so I said I had to go. He seemed really disappointed, like he wanted to keep hanging out. We'd already been playing for like 2 hours, so I just wanted to go home. He followed me halfway home until I said, "See you later," basically saying in a friendly way, "All right, go away now." That was the first warning sign. I remember this kid Hank who lived down the block from me. One day, he rang my doorbell and asked if I could come out and play. I recall thinking he was a bit of a weirdo, but I didn't find it concerning just yet. The next day, Hank rang the doorbell again and asked my parents if I could come play. This time, we played GameCube in my room for about an hour. To be honest, I was starting to not really like him. I felt like he was weird and made me uncomfortable with how physically close he got to me. The next day after school, he rang the bell again. I wasn't really in the mood, so I told my mom to tell him I didn't feel good. He left, and I was relieved. I would rather hang out with my friend Roy, honestly, because I just liked him more. That same day, I rode my bike up to Roy's house to see if he could hang out. He was down, so we started riding our bikes further up the block. This was a mistake because as we passed Hank's house, he came outside onto his front stoop as if he were waiting by the window. It was weird, and it was also awkward because I had just had my mom tell him I was sick before. As we passed, I told Roy that I had hung out with that kid and that I felt like he was slightly weird. Roy was shocked that I had hung out with him, saying that whole family was crazy. I found out from Roy that Hank was actually a couple of years older than me. He was 12. From this point on, I decided to steer clear of him. The next weekend, Hank came to our door again, asking for me. I had told my mom before this already to tell him I'm not home if he came back, so she did that. But late that night, I woke up to my window completely open and a cool breeze blowing into the room. It was a chilly September night, so I most definitely left the window closed originally. Waking up to an unexpected breeze made me question who could have done that. Then I felt something poke my foot, and I screamed. I looked at the foot of my bed and saw Hank. He told me to be quiet, it's just him. Before I could even ask what he was doing in my room, he explained that his parents were fighting and he wanted to sleep with me. He climbed through my window. I was in shock. I told him to get out, and he pleaded with me to let him sleep in bed with me. Again, I told him to get out. Watching him turn and climb out of my window was a disturbing scene. I closed the window and locked it, and then went straight to my parents to wake them up and tell them. They couldn't believe it. The next day, my parents both went down the block to talk to Hank's parents, and when they came back, they said it didn't go well. Hank's crazy mom screamed and laughed in my parents' faces, taking no accountability for her son's actions. I'm sure my parents didn't want to get police involved because Hank was just a kid. But however many nights later, I woke up to knocks at my window. I had my blinds closed, but I knew for a fact it was Hank. I didn't answer the knocks, which went on and on for like 5 minutes. I even heard an attempt at opening the window. I was actually scared. I remember my heart racing. Eventually, the knock stopped. I went to tell my parents, and they told me to just ignore it. I think they weren't as threatened because, like I said before, Hank was just a kid. It was probably a few days later when Roy and I, along with another kid I made friends with from school, were biking from my house down the block, and when we passed Hank's house, I saw him run to the window as we passed. He just watched. I told my friends about what happened, and they found it hilarious. One of my friends made a comment about how he sounds like someone who would live in a gross house like that. That night, for the final time, I woke up to a sound in my room. It was the sound of my window being shattered. I screamed as I saw Hank climbing through the window through the closed blinds. I ran to my parents' room and woke them up. By this point, Hank was already back outside. My dad went outside and chased him all the way back to his house, with Hank making it back inside before my dad could catch up to him. My dad pounded on the door until Hank's parents opened up, and my dad must have said something right because he somehow managed to convince Hank's parents to pay for the window if he didn't involve the police. They ended up paying whatever it cost to fix the window, and I never heard from Hank again. Though I did see him once or twice in front of his house the next couple of years while in the car passing his house. That family eventually ended up moving somewhere else, thankfully. I think there's a chance Hank was looking to do something crazy, like murder me or at the very least attack me, just because he saw me hanging with other kids when I didn't want to be his friend. I mean, what else would he do after shattering my window with something and climbing inside? I'm scared to wonder what kind of person Hank grew up to be. In the quiet town of Briarwood, nestled among the rolling hills, there stood an ancient willow tree. Its sprawling branches reached towards the sky like gnarled fingers, casting eerie shadows over the neighborhood playground. Children were warned to stay away from the tree, for it was said to be cursed. But for Audrey and her friends, curiosity overcame fear. Audrey was 7 years old when she first heard about the legend of the Whispering Willow. It was whispered among the kids at school, a tale passed down from older siblings and cousins. They said that if you stood beneath the tree at midnight and listened closely, you could hear the whispers of lost souls trapped within its ancient roots. One fateful summer evening, Audrey and her two best friends, Imelda and Patrick, decided to test the legend. Armed with flashlights and nervous laughter, they made their way to the playground where the willow stood sentinel in the moonlight. The air was thick with humidity as they approached the tree, its twisted branches swaying gently in the breeze. Audrey's heart raced in her chest as they huddled together beneath the willow's canopy. The playground was deserted, the only sounds the distant chirping of crickets. "Are you sure about this?" Imelda whispered, her voice trembling. Audrey nodded, her palms sweaty against the flashlight. "We have to do it together. On the count of 3. They took a deep breath, their anticipation palpable in the air. 1, 2, 3, Patrick exclaimed, and they switched off their flashlights, plunging themselves into darkness. For a moment, all was silent. Audrey strained her ears, hoping to catch a whisper, a murmur from the depths of the tree. Then, just as doubt began to creep in, she heard it, a soft, haunting whisper, like the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was faint at first, barely audible over the pounding of her heart, but as she listened, it grew louder, more insistent. "Help me, help me." The voice was plaintive, full of sorrow and despair. Audrey's blood ran cold as the words echoed in her mind. She could feel Imelda and Patrick tense beside her, their breaths shallow and ragged. The darkness seemed to press in around them, suffocating and oppressive. "We have to get out of here," Imelda whimpered, her voice barely above a whisper. But before they could move, something shifted in the shadows. A figure emerged from the darkness, its form indistinct and ghostly. It floated towards them, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Audrey's scream pierced the night as the figure reached out a translucent hand, its fingers curling towards her. She stumbled backward, tripping over a gnarled root and falling hard on the ground. "Run," Patrick shouted, grabbing Audrey's hand and pulling her to her feet. They sprinted towards the playground's exit, their hearts pounding in their chests. Behind them, the figure gave chase, its eerie whispers growing louder and more urgent. "Help me. Don't leave me." They burst out of the playground, gasping for breath as they stumbled onto the quiet street. The figure was gone, but the echoes of its voice lingered in their minds. They never spoke of that night again, each too terrified to confront the reality of what they had experienced. The Whispering Willow remained a forbidden place, a dark reminder of the unknown terrors that lurked in the shadows. Years passed, and Audrey grew into a young woman, the memory of that night fading like a distant dream. But one summer evening, as she walked past the playground on her way home, she heard it, a soft, haunting whisper carried on the breeze. "Help me." Audrey's blood turned to ice as she glanced towards the willow tree, its branches reaching towards the darkening sky. In that moment, she knew that some legends were born of truth, and that the Whispering Willow held secrets that were best left undisturbed. In the quaint town of Willowbrook, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there was a house unlike any other. It stood at the edge of town, its weathered facade looming ominously over the neighborhood. Children whispered tales of its haunted past, claiming that the shadows within held secrets darker than the night itself. It was here that young grave digger spent his childhood, unaware of the horrors that awaited him within those walls. Grave was an inquisitive child, always eager to explore the world around him. His parents, both busy with work, often left him to his own devices, trusting the safety of their small town. One summer afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn, Grave found himself drawn to the mysterious house at the end of the street with a sense of curiosity that outweighed his fear. Grave pushed open the rusty gate and ventured into the overgrown yard. Weeds tangled around his ankles as he made his way to the front door, which creaked open with an eerie groan, as if welcoming him inside. The interior was shrouded in darkness, the only light filtering through dusty windows. Grave hesitated at the threshold, a chill creeping up his spine, but something compelled him forward, deeper into the belly of the house. As he stepped into the dimly lit hallway, the air grew thick with a sense of foreboding. Whispers echoed off the walls, faint and indistinct, like the murmurs of a long-forgotten past. Grave's heart raced in his chest as he followed the sound, drawn to a staircase that spiraled upwards into darkness. With each step, the whispers grew louder, forming words that sent shivers down Grave's spine. "Leave," they hissed, "before it's too late." But Grave pressed on, driven by a morbid curiosity that overpowered his fear. At the top of the stairs, he found himself in a narrow corridor lined with closed doors. The whispers seemed to emanate from behind one in particular, its wood warped and splintered with age. Summoning all his courage, Grave pushed open the door to reveal a room frozen in time. Dust-covered furniture lay scattered about, cobwebs clinging to every surface. But what caught Grave's attention was the figure huddled in the corner, its back turned to him. "Hello," Grave called out, his voice trembling. The figure remained motionless, its form shrouded in darkness. Grave took a tentative step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. As he drew closer, he realized with horror that the figure was not human at all. It was a grotesque mannequin, its features contorted into a twisted mask of agony. In its outstretched hand, it held a faded photograph. Grave's hands shook as he took the photograph, his eyes widening in shock. It was a picture of a young boy, no older than himself, standing in front of the very house he now stood in. But what chilled him to the bone was the date on the back, the date of that very day, decades ago. Before he could comprehend the implications, the whispers around him grew deafening, a cacophony of anguished voices filling the room. "Help us," they moaned. "Free us from this place." Grave staggered back, his mind reeling with fear and confusion. Without a second thought, he turned and fled from the room, down the stairs, and out of the house. The echoes of the whispers haunted him every step of the way. When he emerged into the fading light of evening, he found himself in the overgrown yard once more. Gasping for breath, he stumbled towards the gate, desperate to escape the nightmare within. As he reached the gate, a sudden gust of wind slammed it shut with a resounding clang, sealing the house behind him. Grave looked back one last time, the house now looming like a dark specter against the twilight sky. From that day on, Grave avoided the house at the end of the street, the memory of the whispers and the haunting photograph etched into his mind forever. And though he grew up and left Willowbrook behind, he could never shake the feeling that something malevolent lingered within those walls, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim. To this day, the house remains untouched, a relic of a dark and tragic past. If you listen closely on quiet nights, you might just hear the whispers carried on the wind, a chilling reminder of the true stories that lie hidden within the shadows of childhoods long gone. As a child growing up in a small town nestled among dense woods, I often found myself drawn to the mysterious allure of the forest. But what I encountered there on one fateful day would haunt me for years to come. It was a warm summer afternoon, and my friends and I had decided to explore the woods behind our neighborhood. Armed with nothing but our youthful curiosity and a sense of adventure, we ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, eager to uncover its secrets. As we wandered among the towering trees and tangled undergrowth, a sense of unease began to creep over me. The air grew still, and the sounds of bird song and rustling leaves were replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to hang heavy in the air. Ignoring my growing sense of dread, I pressed on, determined to uncover the truth behind the whispers that seemed to echo through the trees. But as we reached a clearing in the forest, the source of the whispers became clear. A dilapidated old house hidden among the trees like a forgotten relic of the past. As we approached the house, a chill ran down my spine, and I felt a wave of terror wash over me. The air was thick with a sense of malevolence, and the shadows seemed to dance with a life of their own. With trembling hands, I pushed open the creaking door and stepped into the darkness beyond. What I found inside would stay with me for the rest of my life. A room filled with decaying furniture and cobweb-covered relics of a bygone era. But it was what lay at the center of the room that filled me with terror. A child's doll, its eyes wide with a look of pure malevolence. And as I stared into those lifeless eyes, I felt a presence watching me from the shadows. A presence that seemed to hunger for something far more sinister than mere flesh and blood. With a cry of terror, I fled from the house, my friends close behind me. But even as we ran, I could still hear the whispers echoing through the woods, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked within. To this day, I cannot shake the feeling that something evil dwells within those woods, something ancient and malevolent that preys on the innocent and the unsuspecting. And though I have long since left that small town behind, the memory of that day will haunt me forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of our reality. As a child, my family lived in a sprawling old house with a basement that seemed to hold endless secrets. But it wasn't until one fateful night that I discovered the true horror lurking beneath our home. It was a stormy evening, and the wind howled outside as rain lashed against the windows. With the power out and the house plunged into darkness, my siblings and I huddled together in the living room, our hearts pounding with fear. But as the night wore on, an eerie sound began to echo through the house. A soft scratching coming from somewhere deep below. At first, we dismissed it as the sound of branches scraping against the windows, but as the scratching grew louder and more insistent, we knew something was terribly wrong. Summoning our courage, we ventured into the basement, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a sense of dread. As we descended the creaking stairs, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to press in around us like a suffocating blanket. But what we found waiting for us in the depths of the basement was far worse than anything we could have imagined. A creature hunched and twisted, its eyes gleaming with malice as it lurked in the shadows. With a scream of terror, we fled from the basement, the creature hot on our heels. As we reached the safety of the main floor, we slammed the door shut behind us, praying that whatever lurked below would never escape its dark prison. To this day, I can still hear the scratching coming from the basement, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurk just beneath the surface of our everyday lives. And though we have long since moved away from that house, the memory of that night will haunt me forever, a reminder of the darkness that dwells within us all. I've been a trucker for close to 15 years now. This happened to me in 2017. I was driving an overnight haul through the Mojave Desert in California, headed for a destination in Arizona. I think I was delivering appliances, but I don't really remember. It was pitch black darkness in every direction. The headlights on my semi were really dim at the time, and I'd been putting off getting them fixed forever. Usually, I couldn't tell the difference, but since there were basically no other cars on the road, it was much more obvious. I remember having to strain my eyes every few minutes to make out the road in the distance. That could have been a horror story in and of itself. I was debating pulling over for a couple of hours and waiting for sunrise, but I didn't want to waste my time. I desperately needed the money at the time, so I kept driving even though it wasn't fully safe. I figured since it was basically a straight line, it would be okay. I think it was about an hour before sunrise when I saw something approaching fast in the distance. Worried about hitting an animal, I slammed on the brakes. As my truck screeched to a stop, I realized what was in front of me, a car with its hazards on. The weird thing was that it was in the exact middle of the road, literally on the double yellow. What was even weirder was that the passenger door was wide open. My truck stopped maybe a foot before hitting it. Not to toot my own horn, but I'm a pretty fearless guy, and I know my way around a bar fight. Because of this, I wasn't really scared when I saw the car. I was more curious than anything. I thought maybe someone needed a jump or something, so I reversed the semi and pulled over. I thought about throwing some flares down but decided against it since I hadn't seen a single other car on the road besides this one. I got out of my truck and made my way over to the car. It was a warm, still night. I remember thinking how strange it was that there was almost no wind. It was also really quiet that night. The faint click of the hazards was the only sound in what felt like the entire desert. I got a little closer to the car. I vividly remember that it was a new-looking red Ford Fusion. I approached the car a little cautiously. Like I said, the passenger door was wide open. I walked around the car and stopped in my tracks. It was completely empty. I made sure of it too, checking the back seat and anywhere someone might be lying down. There was literally no one inside. All of a sudden, I was much less sure about the situation. I was expecting someone to need help of some sort, maybe even someone who took a nap in a really dumb spot. I certainly wasn't expecting this, though. The car was literally empty. I cast a few glances over my shoulder, feeling a lot more uneasy now. I kept whipping my head around, looking in every direction. I felt like someone was going to charge me or something. The problem was it was so dark that I couldn't see that far in front of me except for what was lit up by my truck's headlights. It was eerie. I waited a while longer, thinking about getting back in my truck and forgetting about this whole thing. Someone was out there somewhere. Against my better judgment, I decided to keep investigating. I looked inside the car, but everything seemed completely normal. The key was even in the ignition, although the engine was turned off. I got back out of the car and made my way over to the trunk. Might as well have a look, I figured. I went to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. I grabbed the key out of the ignition and unlocked the trunk. Still, though, the thing wouldn't budge. It was jammed from the inside somehow. I opened the back door and tried getting at the trunk through the back seat. To my surprise, it actually opened. There were 3 squished garbage bags back there, along with a rope that was tying the trunk closed. I remember glancing one more time over my shoulder before reaching for them. The coast was clear. I must have been within 5 inches from one of the bags when the loudest gunshot I've ever heard rang out into the night. I slammed my head on the roof of the car in shock. I didn't even think. I threw the keys on the front seat and got out of the car as fast as I could. As I was climbing into my semi, I heard a grungy voice yelling in the distance. He yelled, "Hey," a bunch of times, and his voice seemed to be quickly approaching. I scrambled into the semi and turned it on. I threw it in gear as fast as I could. I remember cursing a bunch of times as the engine initially stalled. And that's when I saw it. As my truck began pulling out, I saw a person standing at the trunk of the car. It was a short, husky guy with red hair. He was wearing overalls and shin-high boots. In his left hand, he was holding a small shovel. In his right, though, was an old-looking hunting rifle. We locked eyes for a few seconds as my truck began to drive past him. He didn't move. I remember him not looking crazy or anything. He had this worried look on his face. As I passed him, he dropped his shovel and started waving his hands. He yelled, "Wait," a few times, but I wasn't staying there another second. As I drove away, I watched in the rearview mirror as he ran after my truck for a few seconds before sprinting back to his car. It was clear he wanted me to stop, but there was absolutely no way I was going to do that. I stepped on it, pushing the semi much faster than I should have. I drove for like 5 minutes and started to think I was in the clear, but then I saw headlights fast approaching behind me. I remember feeling more scared than I've ever felt in my entire life. I called the police and told them what happened to the best of my ability. That's when the car was basically right on my tail. It started honking like crazy at me. I honestly didn't know what to do, so I just kept driving, praying to God he wouldn't try and ram me. After like 15 minutes of this, he cut in front of me and hit his brakes, forcing me to slow down. I was just about to crash into him when finally some flashing police lights appeared ahead. The Ford veered off to the right and sped into the desert, disappearing from sight. I pulled over and waited for the officer to show up. I frantically told him what had happened, but the useless cop decided to get a report from me rather than chase the guy down. I was so pissed about that. I told the guy like twice that he could probably catch up to him if he left now. The cop told me not to worry and that they'd do a thorough search as soon as backup arrived. He sent me on my way and said they'd call me if they ever had an update for me. They never did. None of my buddies have a story this crazy, and I've told it more times than I can count. I know what you're probably thinking. That guy was definitely burying bodies. That doesn't really explain why he had such a small shovel or why he tried to follow me. The bags in his trunk were also too small for that, although some of my buddies think he might have done some dismembering. For my own sanity, I like to think that he was burying some other kind of animal, maybe putting a diseased dog out of its misery or some dangerous snakes. I really have no idea. Either way, I've never been totally comfortable driving through deserts late at night after this experience. I'm sure you've seen some of the more modern videos online where truckers document their daily routines and provide tips for each other. Or maybe you haven't, but being as I'm on the younger side in this industry, every time I open TikTok or YouTube Shorts, that's all I see. I won't get into it, but I had to drop out of a pretty prestigious university for some personal reasons, and people always tell me I could have been more than a trucker. It's honestly not a bad gig though. I've been making deliveries for north of 2 years. Obviously, the only strenuous part of the job is the long hours. You can never truly gauge how the isolation will affect you without experiencing it firsthand. My only advice would be to make peace with whatever demons might be lurking in your subconscious, because they'll definitely eat at your brain in the lonely hours. That's what happened to me anyway. This happened to me 3 months after getting employed by my first company. I was basically as new in this trade as one could get. I was driving from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana, a 12-hour drive. 12 hours driving might not seem that crazy, but factor in the fact that I had just completed an 8-hour trip, and that should put things into perspective. I wanted to get deliveries done as quickly as possible, so I opted to drive through the night. I get to Lafayette just before 3 a.m. Things were going smoothly. There were virtually no other cars on the road, so I was able to push the semi a little faster than normal. About halfway through the drive, I remember reaching down at the center console to chug a Red Bull, but there weren't any. Of course, I had forgotten to restock my truck after completing my previous delivery. After slapping my dashboard a few times, I groaned in frustration, knowing I'd have to stop somewhere. There was nothing I hated more than having to make stops during my drives. I might be unique in this, but I always get exponentially more tired when my vehicle is immobile, even if I'm only stopped for like 20 seconds. After glancing up at the navigation, I figured I had no choice, either fall asleep on the road or stop and get an energy drink. In my brain, those options were pretty much equivalent. Reluctantly, I pulled into the first service stop I saw. I had literally no clue where I was, probably somewhere in Ohio at this point. Too late, I realized this wasn't actually a service stop. It was what looked like an abandoned gas station and a repurposed convenience store. Not sure if there's any better way to describe it. Either way, It looked like there was another quick stop store not far up the road, so I figured I'd go there if anything. I parked the semi. I made my way over to the first convenience store. To be completely honest, I was expecting one of two things to happen. Either the place would be open, or the door would be locked. You can imagine my surprise then when the door swung open into a pitch-black store. I looked around, hoping maybe I'd get lucky and there would be a drink or snack left behind. Just before I was about to turn around, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I picked up on a faint glow emanating from the corner of the room. I made my way over to it, and the glow turned out to be coming from a back room of some sort. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door slowly. To my pleasant surprise, there was a plugged-in refrigerator against the wall. Eagerly, I opened the door but found nothing. Literally nothing. The shelves had been removed, the whole appliance had been gutted. As I was shutting the door, I was 90% certain I heard a clatter from the main room, like something hitting the floor. I froze for a good 10 seconds. Had I imagined it? There was no way. Quietly, I walked back into the main room and looked around. Nothing. Part of me wanted to keep investigating, but I didn't have time for this. I walked out the entrance door and basically jogged to the other shop. It was open, thank God. I paid for my drink and made it back to my truck. Something about this whole stop felt wrong. I needed to get back on the road as soon as possible. I took one last glance at the abandoned store and noticed the door was now open. I was 100% positive I had shut it behind me. It wasn't my job to figure out what was going on here, so I started the engine and merged my semi back onto the highway. The caffeine started kicking in and snapped me out of my tired haze pretty quickly. My mind began to wander, and I started thinking about how bizarre that whole thing had actually been. I guess a squatter or an abandoned building wasn't the strangest thing in the world, but my brain couldn't explain that refrigerator, no matter what theory I thought of. I tried to forget about it and kept driving. It was then that I started noticing weird movements in the curtain behind me. Sweat started dripping down my forehead. I watched in the rearview mirror as the curtain seemed to billow and move, even though I didn't have the air on. I thought the worst, there was someone in my truck. I didn't have any weapons on me or anything, so I discreetly punched in the nearest police station on my phone. The drive there was the most tense and horrifying 20 minutes of my life. I kept imagining that person reaching out to grab me or trying to crash my truck. Finally, I approached the police station. I stopped the semi as close as I possibly could get and basically ran over to the police station. In seconds, my truck was surrounded by police, and after I opened the back, what I saw will stay with me for life. The police pulled out 3 homeless-looking people, 2 men and 1 woman. They were wearing rags and were wrapped in nasty-looking blankets. One of the men was armed with 2 switchblades. All 3 of them refused to talk but stared menacingly at me as they were getting cuffed. I have no idea what they wanted. I don't think I'll ever know. My name is Arthur. I've been a trucker for various companies for the better part of 15 years now. Things have become pretty routine at this point. Pick up the goods and materials, verify them for accuracy, and deliver them as instructed. We're not paid by the hour, so efficiency is the most important thing in this line of work. For someone like me who's been doing this forever, I like to think I can outwork all these young guns that are snapping these jobs up. This isn't always great, though. Usually, I push myself to the absolute limit when it comes to functioning on barely any sleep. 4 years ago, I was working for a warehouse based in North Dakota. For anyone who doesn't know, North Dakota is one of the flattest states, which makes trucking a little easier. This also meant that skipping out on a few hours of sleep could mean the difference between employment and getting the sack. It was a chilly Tuesday morning in May. The beginning of the week meant that more loads needed to be shipped, which meant more work for me. I wanted to knock it all out in one shot, so I traced my route into Montana accordingly, planning on not stopping even once to sleep. I hit the road a few hours after lunch, expecting to reach my destination very early the next morning. I pushed the semi as much as possible, doing maybe a couple over the speed limit. It was getting late, and I remember rubbing the crust from my eyelids as the clock ticked past midnight. I was having trouble keeping my eyes open, but I only had about an hour left in this drive, so I gritted my teeth and kept going. My buddy Tristan, who was also a trucker, introduced me to smelling salts when I first started out. If you don't know, smelling salts are basically some kind of crystals in a little bottle. One sniff and you're wide awake. You had to be careful, though. Too many back-to-back uses could be dangerous, or at least that's what Tristan told me. They burn your nose a little bit, but whenever I needed a boost, I'd reach for the smelling salts first. This was one of those times. I took a big whiff and shot my head back, my reflexes taking over. I felt the adrenaline course through my body and hoped the feeling would last the rest of the drive. A half hour shot by, and I was really struggling. I felt myself start to doze off, and the blare of my truck drifting into the shoulder jolted me awake. This was getting dangerous, I thought. I had to pull off. I was all alone on the highway, but there was nowhere to pull off. There were just woods on either side of me. I slowed the truck down, searching desperately for somewhere to pull over. At this low speed, my headlights pierced through the darkness, and I was able to see a lot more. As I looked around, I saw something that confused me. There was a purple dress lying in the middle of the road. What the hell, I thought, rubbing my eyes. Was I hallucinating? I blinked like 6 times just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. It was real. I approached the dress with my truck and stared at it as I rolled by. In hindsight, this should have been more of a red flag, but I think I was just too exhausted to process what was going on. About 200 or so yards away, I passed a pair of shoes. Now I was starting to freak out. What the hell was going on? I passed the shoes, praying to God there would be a place to pull off soon. My old man Finn was a super religious guy, so I clutched his old cross and hoped he would come through for me. A little further up the road, I saw a bunch more random clothing, some of which looked like little kids' clothing. This time, I stopped the truck. The panic started to set in. Something was very, very wrong. I sat in the driver's seat with the truck at a standstill. I was expecting something to happen, but it never did. So I did what my instincts told me to do. I stepped out of the truck and went to inspect the clothing. I still remember the feeling of the chilly morning air piercing my skin, which definitely helped my exhaustion. I approached the pile as cautiously as I could. It was indeed kids' clothing. It looked like there were both boy and girl pieces of clothing in the pile. I looked around into the woods, but I couldn't see much of anything in the darkness. I had my head on a swivel, worried that this was some kind of trap. I decided it was not my business to figure out what was going on, so I made my way back to my truck. Just then, I heard a crunch from the left. I whipped around, trying to see what was there. I stood there, waiting to hear another sound. After about 30 seconds, there was another crunch, but this time from the opposite side of the road. My survival instincts kicked in, and I sprinted towards the truck. I jumped into the front seat, but just before I slammed the door, I heard a child's scream ring out. I froze, my heart bursting out of my chest. I was caught at a crossroads. I wasn't going to fight some random people in pitch-black woods, but I couldn't just abandon some helpless kids either. Before I could make a decision, another almost identical child's scream rang out. Without thinking, I turned the truck on and pointed its nose toward the spot in the woods where I heard the noise. My headlights lit up about 30 yards into the woods. There were 3 or 4 people, one of whom was holding a massive speaker. They ducked behind a couple of trees as my truck lit them up, but I had exposed them for just enough time to make out what they were doing. They hid from the light before I could really make out any distinctive features, but I swear on my old man Finn's grave, they were holding up a speaker, trying to lure me into the woods with a fake kid screaming. I was just in shock. I just sat there staring at the trees those people had just hidden behind. I reached for my phone to call the police, but before I finished dialing, I heard a thump from the body of the truck. Someone had thrown something from the other direction. I was done. I turned back to face the road and slammed on the gas. As I sped off, I could make out a person on the other side of the road. He shouted something I couldn't understand before launching something at the truck that cracked the glass of my passenger side window. I drove the final hour in silence. I was too scared to process what had just happened, but there was no way in hell I was stopping to sleep in those woods. I completed my delivery and then knocked out. I must have slept for 10 hours straight. When I woke up, the first thing I did was call the police, who told me they'd investigate those woods and give me any updates. I then thought about 7 years ago, on my way home from my parents' house, I experienced something truly terrifying. I was 22, young, naive, and well, dumb. I had just moved into my first apartment, becoming the first in my family to leave our sleepy old train town. I visited home every Sunday to see my family, do laundry, and enjoy Sunday dinner. I lived about 45 minutes up the highway, so I generally headed home by 6 p.m. On this particular night, there was a relentless summer thunderstorm that had been pouring down rain all day. Just as I was packing up to leave after dinner, my cousins dropped in, so I ended up sticking around for a few more hours to visit. I left my mom's around 10 p.m. in the pouring rain. This was the first time after moving out that I encountered something that truly scared me. I never told anyone about this, possibly out of pride. Everyone always gave me trouble about living alone as a single female in a new area. Anyway, here it goes. I left my parents' house around 10 p.m. in the pouring rain. I'm driving down the service road that leads out of town and eventually turns into the on-ramp to the highway. As you leave town, the service road turns into one lane right in front of a quarry train loading station. I'm not really clear on what that place is, but it always gave me the creeps. If you're unfortunate enough to pass through when a train is crossing the road to load, you'll be stuck there for a while. Once the road passes the tracks, it turns back into 2 lanes and goes up a steep hill. As I'm approaching the quarry, I can make out the orange lights on a red cab 18-wheeler sitting in the quarry parking lot. Mind you, it's pouring rain, visibility is low, so I can't make out the trucker until I'm pretty close to him. As soon as I can see it's a trucker, he pulls out into the road. I had to slam on my brakes to avoid hitting the trailer on the back of the truck. I skid around on the road until I regained control of the car. Now I'm stuck behind this dummy who just pulled out without paying attention. I keep my distance because I'm flustered. For the record, my headlights were on, so if he had been paying attention, he should have seen me. Honestly, with the heavy rain and low visibility, who knows? So, I'm behind this guy as we cross the tracks and begin to climb the steep hill. Despite it turning into 2 lanes on the hill, he's driving right up the middle of the 2 lanes. Figuring he didn't realize it was 2 lanes, I just putter along behind him, keeping my distance. As soon as he reaches the peak of the hill and the road levels out, he moves over to the right lane. Yes, finally. So, I move over and begin to pass him. As soon as I get past the front of the truck, he swerves behind me quite abruptly and begins flashing his high beams at me. Usually, when someone flashes their lights behind you in our area, it means turn on your lights, but mine were already on. I checked as soon as he started flashing at me. Weirded out, I put my blinker on and safely change lanes to get out of his way. He follows my lane change and begins laying on his horn. The honking startled me, and I began to get a lot more flustered. What the hell did this guy want? I moved out of his way and my headlights were on. Why didn't I just speed up and zip away, you may be asking. Well, I grew up in this area. It had been raining heavily all day, and I knew that the service road floods a little in heavy rain, both on the shoulders and in random spots in the middle of the lanes. It's a small Midwestern town. Our roads are shitty. I had already skidded and nearly wrecked once, and I wasn't about to floor it on this bumpy, flooded service road and risk wrecking again. There is nothing between that quarry and the highway, just about 4 or 5 miles of wooded area. If I wrecked, it would have been just him and me. This went on for the next 4 or 5 miles to the highway. He began tailgating me in addition to the high beams and honking. Once the tailgating began, I was in tears. I didn't know what this guy wanted from me. I was just trying to stay out of his way and get home safely. That's all I wanted. I changed lanes 2 more times, making 3 total. He followed me from lane to lane. As we approached the highway, I floored it. He couldn't accelerate quickly enough to keep up, and I lost him finally. As soon as I realized I'd lost him and was safe on the highway, I just lost it. I was a hysterical wreck. There is only one exit after getting on the highway to stop in the small town the highway runs through. After that, it's all wooded for a good 30 minutes. Here's a more structured and coherent version of your text with appropriate pauses. I thought about getting off at that exit to calm down and pull myself together, but I just wanted to go home, so I sped right past it. I should have stopped. Once the city was no longer visible in my rearview mirror, I felt much calmer. I managed to scramble my cell out of my purse and put it in my lap just in case. The rain led up to a drizzle the further I went, but I was still pretty on edge. There weren't many other cars on the highway, and most of them were truckers. I'm cruising along in the center lane when the truck next to me in the passing lane begins blaring the horn and moves into my lane, forcing me over to the 3rd lane. He continued moving over, nearly forcing me off the highway. I sped up and changed lanes right in front of him so that I'm back in the center lane. I slowed down until I was in line with the front cab. I double-clicked the home button on my phone, camera shortcut, and rolled down my window, starting to take pictures of the cabbie. I think the flashes made him realize what I was doing, and he began slowing down until he was behind me again. I got a lot of pictures. I sped up and lost sight of him behind me. I was satisfied I managed to get pictures, but I was so angry at this point. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the highway and waited for him. I just wanted to get behind him so I could get a picture of the license plate and report this. Sadly, he was on to me for sure. I noticed headlights behind me a long way back, but behind me nonetheless, on the shoulder of the highway. I waited, keeping an eye on the truckers passing me by, just to be sure I didn't miss him. I noticed a shadow pass through the headlights of the truck, which spooked me quite a bit. Did he get out of the cab? I didn't stick around to find out. I just took off and got home as quickly as possible. The pictures were a total failure. It was still drizzling. The flash combined with the drizzle just resulted in washing out the pictures. I could see the red cab, but no matter what filters I used, there was no making out exactly what the cab said. Red cab trucker, you're the reason I have a dash cam in my car. We were hitchhiking through Europe, my then boyfriend and I, and on our way back home, a truck driver picked us up. We had had a few weird encounters on our trip before, but we had been on the road for about a month, and nothing really scary happened until we met this guy. He was a young guy, about 25, quite regular, spoke English okay, and had been away from home for a long time. I was a bit younger, with my boyfriend being around his age. My boyfriend was tired, so he took a seat on the bed in the truck and wasn't really trying to hold a conversation. During our trip, we switched turns as I usually do when I hitchhike with someone. One person talks with the driver, and the other relaxes in the back, so I was in the passenger seat. I think my boyfriend was even dozing off a little bit when the driver started complimenting me and asking about my boyfriend. It was still fine, nothing too weird, and I was just trying to talk to be good company. As we moved on, I started to feel a bit uncomfortable, but I didn't let anything on and only told my boyfriend that we should find truck drivers from our country to make the last part of our trip in one go. I translated this to English immediately because the truck driver became agitated and suspicious of what I was saying. I explained that we were really tired and our plan was to find our truck drivers before he had to take a long break so that we could continue traveling without interruption. We stopped for a short break at a gas station, and my boyfriend decided he was going to look for another truck driver in the parking lot, leaving me with this guy alone. Damn, the truck driver came on to me real hard, and I was scared shitless and didn't fight back. I could feel how aroused he was, and there was no doubt about his intentions. Luckily, my boyfriend was away for just a minute. At that moment, I realized we needed to get out of this situation fast. I didn't want to say anything to my boyfriend because I was scared of how he would react, so I decided to pretend nothing had happened. I was determined to get out at the next stop. We reached a large gas station for truck drivers only and told our driver we were going to look for other drivers heading our way. During our trip to this station, this guy got in touch with another driver, saying he could also take us, maybe one at a time. Damn, I thought, now he's planning a threesome. When I was finally alone with my boyfriend, I remained calm, hinted at what had happened, and insisted that we not stay with this driver no matter what. It took us about 5 minutes to find a group of truck drivers from our country. They were having beers and cracking jokes, and 2 of them agreed to take us. I jumped with joy. We went back to the truck to get our things. The guy had already brought his friend along and was offering my boyfriend to take a shower at the gas station, saying he would pay for him for no obvious reason. He was quite persistent, and as I very well remember, he never offered it to me. Needless to say, these 2 guys were very disappointed to see us go. I still remember how they were looking at me when I was taking our backpacks from the truck. I have never told my ex-boyfriend the details. I was just lucky that we got away from that truck driver, and I think he has never realized how bad the situation was. At that time, I was playing it cool the whole time, but inside, I was shaking. I could see how desperate that truck driver was and how much he wanted to get rid of my boyfriend. I was so angry at myself for staying with him in the truck by myself, but then all of our things were there. I was also angry for not fighting him back, but it was so sudden, and I got really scared. Well, I would never hitchhike alone. I was 18 at the time and had just started college, living out of state on my own for the first time. I had a pretty sheltered life. I am also a female, so my first semester at my out-of-state college had just ended. It was May, and I was on my way home from my brother's wedding. I'm about an hour away from my current residence, with a little over 3 hours left of my trip. Everything is going great, and I'm just cruising with the traffic. It was a notably busy day for that particular stretch of interstate, somewhere on I-40 in Tennessee. As I said, all was well until I checked my mirror. There was a truck a little farther back from the side of my car in the lane next to me. I could see his headlights in my passenger side mirror. I looked up because, even though it was the middle of the afternoon and super sunny out, this dude was flashing his lights at me. I tried to brush it off and assumed he just wanted to get into my lane, so I tried moving. He stayed behind me the whole time, not letting any other cars get between us. He kept flashing his lights at me, and I looked up at him. He waved and honked. This was a red flag, but I took it the wrong way. I thought, oh, I wonder if he's signaling me to pull over. I hope nothing is wrong with my car. The only reason I thought this was because, the week before, I had gotten a hole in my tire and had it patched. I was worried that the patch had fallen out and that my tire was going flat as I traveled. I'm freaking out about my car and plan to pull off at the next exit. Fortunately, it comes up quickly, and there is a gas station with some customers visible from the exit ramp. I head there and pull up at a gas pump. Curiously, the trucker follows me off the interstate and into the same parking lot, but he parks in a designated truck zone. I get out just before he parks and walk around my car, doing a quick inspection. I see him start to get out of his truck, and I decide to buy gas, even though I filled up before I left. As I swiped my car to pay for my gas, the truck driver had reached my car. Lucky for me, since I was already pretty freaked out by him following me off the exit, I had my phone in my hand with 911 already dialed, so I would just have to hit the call button. I left my driver door open and stayed between that and the gas hose, with him standing a few feet away from the back end of my car, the hose separating us. The first thing this guy says to me is, "Well, aren't you a pretty thing?" I'm screaming in my head now, imagining all possible scenarios for an emergency escape. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s and about 170 pounds. Me, I was 18, 125 pounds, without much muscle or fat anywhere on me. I wouldn't have been able to fight back much anyway. I told him thank you. He offered to buy my gas, and I declined, saying my parents gave me money. I was actually worried that he would expect something in return if I had taken his offer. He asked me questions like where I was from, where I was going, etc. Something went off in my head that just said lie, so I did. I didn't tell him what college I really went to, where I was really headed, or what I was doing. Nothing. My gas was done pumping after about a minute. With that, I told him goodbye, jumped in my car, and got out of there. I kept an eye on him as I left, making sure he didn't follow me any longer, and he didn't. I never saw him again. I don't know what he wanted with me that day, whether it was just to tell me how attractive I was or if he had something much worse planned. I really regret not reporting him to the police. Since this incident, I've always been leery of truck drivers. Back in 2013, I had just started an education, and after the first school period, I had to find an internship to progress. At the time, it proved almost impossible to get one, so while I was looking, I decided to take another job just to ensure we had food on the table. After searching for a while, I found out a friend of my fiance's family had his own handicap bus company, a kind of taxi service for wheelchair users or otherwise disabled people, and he needed someone to cover the night shift since it was a bus that had to be on call at least 22 hours a day. Seeing that I'm quite the owl, I immediately told him that I'd be happy to take the job, and after I got the needed license, I was hired. The job was pretty basic: pick up and drop them off where they needed to go, and sometimes use a machine to get wheelchairs up or down some stairs. When there were no trips, I drove to a designated area and did whatever while waiting. I quickly found a truck stop in the area where I could park and catch some Z's. There was a gas station where I could buy coffee in the early hours of the shift. On the other side of the gas station's parking lot, on the opposite side of the truck stop, there was a rundown restaurant with a motel connected to it. To avoid disturbing the sleeping truckers if I got a trip in the middle of the night, I usually parked on the restaurant side. After parking there every night for a while, I noticed one particular room had a lot of people coming and going. In the beginning, I thought nothing of it. Then, one night at the end of summer, while I was half asleep with the windows slightly open, I suddenly heard yelling coming from the motel. A dude came tumbling out of the room and started running. A few seconds later, a big guy came running after him with something in his hand that I could not make out. I thought it was none of my business and went back to my half-sleeping waiting stage. Not much time passed, and my phone went off. I had a trip an hour's drive away, so I turned on the bus and was leaving the parking lot when I saw the big guy coming around the corner. The rest of the night I had back-to-back trips, so I didn't park until I got home. The day after, I didn't get a return-to-home zone until 2 o'clock or 3 a.m. When I arrived at the parking lot, the area where I used to park had fist-sized rocks strewn all over the place. Not connecting the dots at the time, I just parked a few spots over and started waiting. I fell asleep pretty fast but was jerked back into reality when a car right in front of my bus honked its horn, flashed the high beams, and revved its engine. I thought it was just some idiot who noticed me sleeping and found it funny to try to scare me, so I jumped out of the bus, about to tell him to screw off. But instead of driving off or stopping, the driver made the start brake motion with the car, indicating that I was the one who should screw off. Then I connected the dots. Not wanting to seem like a pushover, I stood still and stared at the car, not that I could actually see anything with the high beams almost blinding me. After what seemed like a really long time, but must not have been more than 30 seconds, the car drove off. After that, I decided to park near the trucks from then on. A month or so passed, and nothing had happened since the car episode. I figured that nothing more would happen if I just kept parking by the trucks. Then, one night, I had a long 12-hour shift on a Sunday, and I didn't have time to eat dinner before work that day. During the first half of my shift, I had back-to-back trips with no time to eat. So when I got a return-to-home zone, I quickly parked in the far end of the almost empty truck stop and got ready to eat my now very late dinner that my fiancée packed for me. I wanted to watch some TV on my phone while eating, so I sat with my back against the driver's side door and got comfy. While turning my back to the door, I accidentally hit the door lock with my elbow, but that was my luck. As I was sitting there scrolling Netflix on my phone, I suddenly felt the bus rock and heard the clack of the door handle behind me smack back into position. I quickly turned and saw a dude with a hood over his head quickly crouching and proceeding to lay down on the ground and crawl under the bus with a big kitchen knife in his right hand. I quickly got up and made sure the other two doors were locked. Then I looked in all directions to see if I could spot him. He was still under the bus, and I was sure as hell not jumping out this time since the knife made his intentions pretty clear. I turned on the engine, turned on the spots on the back of the bus, and looked around to see if it had scared him off. Lucky for me, it did. I saw him run off into a bushy, woody area at the end of the truck stop. I never parked at that truck stop again after that night, and I made sure all doors were locked every time I was parked. This happened when my now husband and I were moving from the east to the west coast of the US. This had been our second time making this trip, and this one was just to pick up a few last things and grab our 2 dogs. At this point, we were just trying to make good time since we were tired of being on the road and would only stop for food and restroom breaks. So we weren't strangers to rest stops at odd hours of the day. I can't remember what state this happened in because we do a lot of traveling, and rest stops have all blurred together over the years. Anyways, my husband had been driving for a while, and it was time to switch off, walk the dogs, and stretch our legs. So we pulled into a rest stop around 3 o'clock or 4 a.m. There was only one other vehicle in the lot, most likely with someone sleeping inside of it, and not that many truckers in the truck area, so the rest area was fairly empty. I jumped out of the car and let my husband know I was going to run into the restroom before I let the dogs out. While I ran in, he was going to hang out by the car to have a smoke and keep an eye on our dogs. However, we parked our car by the dog area, and to get to the restrooms, you had to walk over this hill. You couldn't see the restrooms from our car. Being late at night, my husband decided to walk most of the way with me to make sure I got there okay. I wasn't worried but didn't mind the extra comfort of having him there. I finished up in the restroom and came out to walk the dogs and let my husband take his restroom break. Even though it was late and I felt a bit cut off from the lighted area of the rest stop, I wasn't worried. I'm small and don't weigh much, but my dogs are German Shepherd mixes and very protective of me. Plus, I was taught self-defense at a young age and feel capable of defending myself if the time came. So I'm walking my dogs and letting them do their business when I noticed that one of the semi-trucks, which had been sitting on the far side of the stop, starts up and slowly drives in my direction. This didn't seem worrisome to me because they were on the trucker's side, and I assumed they were heading to the exit to get back onto the highway. I grabbed 2 doggy bags to clean up after my dogs and started heading to the trash can. As I'm walking, I'm suddenly blinded by bright headlights. I looked in the direction of the lights and saw that the semi, which I thought was leaving, had pulled up as close to the truck lot and car lot divide as possible and now had its brights aimed directly at me. Pissed off that someone was blinding me with their brights, I quickly tossed the poop bags away and started walking back to my car. As I'm walking away, the dude starts flashing his lights over and over again. I'm almost to my car, wondering if I'm missing something and becoming more and more irritated. He starts creeping his truck in my direction again while flashing his lights. My dog sensed my irritation and immediately went on alert, staring in the trucker's direction. I finally made my way to my car, and the guy is still flashing his lights while stopping his truck in my direction again. I don't scare easily, so I decided to stand there and glare in his direction. Then he finally stopped flashing his lights. Good, I assumed he was done and started getting my keys out to unlock the car. Suddenly, my dogs stiffened beside me, their hackles raised, and they began to growl. I heard the sound of a door opening and turned back in the trucker's direction. I saw his door was now opened, and I saw a foot starting to exit the truck. I'm sitting there thinking this guy is a complete idiot when, at this point, my husband shows up and wraps his arm around me while flipping the trucker off. The trucker's foot disappears back into his truck. He shuts his door and leaves the rest stop pretty fast. I told my husband about him flashing his lights, and he explained that truckers use this method to flag women down at rest stops for sex. I was grossed out. I'm guessing he thought I was alone because of how the rest stop was set up. However, I was in no way dressed like someone interested in random sex at a rest stop. I was wearing layers because it was cold and driving a newer car. Plus, what idiot thinks it's a good idea to try to approach someone with two huge dogs? Although I was never scared during the whole thing, I do think the situation was creepy because the guy was obviously not quite there and was acting pretty abrasive. A few months ago, I was driving back to school from visiting my parents. It's about a 2-hour drive, so I usually keep myself entertained with music. I'm a 5 feet 3 inches, 21-year-old female driving my dad's little old pickup truck alone in the leftmost lane of a 3-lane highway, dorking around to the music on the radio. Suddenly, I noticed a semi-truck going the exact same speed as me in the rightmost lane. Embarrassed for getting caught in dork mode, I stopped singing and tried to speed up so he couldn't see me anymore. He matched my speed, which ticked me off a little bit, so I looked at the driver, expecting to see some angry jerk. To my surprise, he was smiling and waving. Thrown off, I kind of chuckled and waved back. Big mistake. He moved over to the middle lane to be closer to me and now wouldn't stop smiling and waving. At first, I played nice, waving back a little because a semi-truck beats a tiny pickup truck any day. But I was mostly focusing on getting out of this guy's field of vision safely. I tried speeding up as fast as my truck would allow and slowing down as suddenly as I could without endangering anyone behind me, but he would just match my speed. If there was someone coming up in his lane, he'd move to the right at the last possible second and pass them before I could slow down and get behind them. He has a lot more practice with reckless maneuvering than I do, so he has me trapped and is using other cars to help him. The whole time, he's smiling, waving, and holding up the number 1 sign for some reason I still don't know. His charm is rapidly fading as this continues for about 5 miles. I got worried and called 911. I gave them a description of the truck, white cargo truck, black cab with some Pennsylvania company logo on it, and the driver was a balding, middle-aged tan guy with a dirty blue t-shirt. They advised me to pull off to the emergency shoulder on the left, but I had never done that and it looked too narrow, so I didn't feel comfortable doing that. At this point, he was passing someone else in the middle lane, and I finally had a chance to slow down and merge 2 lanes over to the rightmost lane. I started speeding past him so he couldn't trap me again. The operator told me to take the closest service plaza about 5 miles away. She said he probably wouldn't follow me, so I could stop there for a few minutes before getting back on the highway. She told me to call if he did follow me, but she was confident he probably wouldn't, so she hung up. Now he's still holding up the sign and smiling this creepy, increasingly perverted grin at me while I avoid eye contact. The service plaza is in a quarter mile, and I'm not using any turn signals, but I guess he knew what I was doing because he braked hard and merged behind me right at the last second to join me in exiting to the service plaza. After I got my heart to start back up from the coronary area just experienced, I called 911 again. The way this service plaza was set up was that semi-trucks had to use a separate lane winding to the right of the plaza that led to a parking lot behind the plaza just for big trucks. The rest of us used a smaller lane to park immediately in front of the plaza. I parked, and as I'm explaining to the new operator what's going on, I watched the semi creep around its path while the driver stared me down, smiling. I freaked out. He knew where I had parked. He knew where to find me. If I just stayed there, I thought maybe I could have floored it to get back on the highway, but I was afraid he would see me and follow me again. So, I drove to a gas station to the left of the plaza, which had a view of the semi-truck parking lot, hoping he wouldn't find me until the police came. The operator transferred me to the woman who was helping me before. She informed me that they had dispatched a couple of police cars but couldn't tell me how long they would be. I saw the trucker had gotten out of his truck and was heading towards me. Even though my windows were closed and my doors were locked, I was panicking on the phone with the operator. She told me the police should be there soon and that I should be safe there, so I should sit tight while I kept her updated. I wanted to at least drive back to the parking lot I was in before, but it was a one-way entrance to the gas station, so I couldn't. I glared at the trucker and showed him my phone when he came close. He finally stopped smiling and made it look like he was going into the service plaza. I looked in my right side view mirror and found him hiding behind a big white pillar in front of the plaza, staring at me again. I freaked out and asked the operator where the cops were and if I could leave because he was being ultra creepy. She told me to sit tight again because they should be there any minute, so I did. Then he came out of hiding and started walking towards my truck. I put it in drive just in case and told the operator what he was doing. I refused to make eye contact with him but kept watching my mirrors to make sure I knew where he was. The smile was back, and he started walking in circles around my truck, looking at it as if looking for a way to get in. I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until he circled back behind me, floored it, and told the operator I wasn't waiting one more second for the police. She apologized and told me the police would look for the man and talk to him if they found him, and that I should focus on getting home safely while keeping an eye out for him. I don't know if they did that or not, but I know none of that would have happened if I had my boyfriend with me. So not only can't I walk alone, but I also can't drive alone as a female. Nice to know. I've worked in manual labor my entire life, but I took a gig hauling trucks for a few years in the early 2000s. I got an offer for a package that I couldn't refuse in the way of full-time pay with part-time hours if I could meet the arrival times. I got insurance benefits, everything an employee dreams about. I got my commercial driver's license as well as a few other certifications, and found myself on the road just a month or so later. I had a lot of jobs where things got weird or just crazy, but one particular evening makes the others pale in comparison. I don't like stories with a lot of fluff, so I'm just going to jump right into it. I was on a return trip from Oregon to Minnesota. I had already made one delivery, hooked up a second, and was now technically on my way home. This was about the halfway point. Weather was great, I was feeling good and motivated. My time on that trip was well ahead of schedule, so I made sure not to push it or burn myself out. I found it super defeating to get home from a long haul and be too exhausted to enjoy it. It's always better to take a little time and stay level. I also have a bit of a heart condition, so heavy caffeine intake isn't an option for me. Most of my life has been all natural, using whatever remedy I could come up with to keep my energy up. The biggest influence was just a good diet, exercise, and a consistent sleep schedule. That means I stopped every night generally at the same time, got a good amount of rest, and that's it. Many of my trips were clocked to the very last second, but I managed to always arrive on time. I passed over the Idaho border and started gunning through Montana. Lots of beauty, but ultimately not much in the way of civilization out there. The route took me through Missoula and some more established townships. Between them, though, you'd be lucky to find a service station of any kind. Rural stretches like this always kept me on my toes as I'd heard horror stories about guys running out of gas, blowing tires, or encountering engine trouble. There isn't help for 75 miles in each direction. On top of that, some of these rural stretches don't see a lot of traffic. Some early mornings, I wouldn't see another car on the road for an hour at a time. I had my eyes set on a trucking station out in the middle of nowhere between Bozeman and Livingston. I'd roll through Bozeman around dinner time, grab a quick bite to eat, then push on towards the station. I'd let my food settle and digest a bit. After an hour of driving, I'd hit my target, pull over, and be totally ready for bed. I liked routine, structure, and having a plan. That night, everything was supposed to be simple. At first, it was. My plan was going smoothly. I got dinner, gassed up, experienced little to no traffic, and was back on the road in no time. Soon, I found my head swimming from the digestion and long day of driving. But there it was, some lights out there alongside the highway. You know exactly what I'm talking about, those big concrete pullouts on the side of interstates every 100 miles or so. They usually have a bathroom, vending machine, trash cans, everything people living on the road might need. I pulled in and found a rare sight, not a single vehicle anywhere. No one was using this rest station, and I liked that. There's a kind of security in being solo, if that makes sense. I let the truck cool down, locked everything up, then crawled into the living space in the back. My area was very simple, a bed, small table attached to the wall, and an overhead shelf to store most of my belongings. I also had a little makeshift power cell which I used to charge a portable flip DVD player that had both the player and the screen. It was one of those inventions of the 2000s that could have only been popular then. I settled in with my big blankets and pillows and watched one of my favorites, Resident Evil or Reign of Fire, an action thriller of some kind. Despite the shooting and explosions, I fell asleep just after 30 minutes. I closed the DVD player and surrendered to the darkness inside my cab. It must have only been a couple hours later when something woke me up. I couldn't place it, but I knew something jarred me. I have a habit of snoring occasionally, and when I do, I sometimes wake myself up with one of those louder rips. I thought maybe that's what happened, so I snuggled in for a few more hours of sleep. I like to hit the road before sunrise and get those extra miles in before the rest of the world wakes up. Just as I closed my eyes though, I heard it, the sound that woke me up. It wasn't a snore like I thought, but the abruptness of a cough. It came from somewhere beyond the cab, outside in the parking lot. It sounded partially muffled, maybe another trucker had pulled in and I just simply hadn't heard the rumble. Really didn't seem that likely, but I guess anything is possible, right? I wanted to be sure of what I heard, so I turned on the small overhead light. The second that flicked on, I could hear shoes slapping the asphalt and the sound of someone running away. As I listened, the footsteps faded a bit. The person was running away from my truck. They must have seen the light come on and reacted to that. But at this point, I'm now on high alert. I turned the light off so as not to give away my position within the truck. As long as it's dark, it's almost impossible to see in the depth of the sleeping cab, so I used that to my advantage. Looking out, I surveyed the parking lot and found something unusual, an older van parked across the lot, sitting angled so the broadside faced my windshield. Definitely weird, as I was 100% alone when I pulled in originally. That parking lot was empty. I tried to be reasonable though. Maybe he was walking his dog, having a smoke. Whatever the case, the person was likely a long-haul traveler just like myself. The guy was probably stretching his legs, doing a few laps of the parking lot when he accidentally woke me up. Once he saw the light, he realized that he made a mistake, then hightailed it back to his van. It really wasn't the most out-of-the-ordinary thing to happen at a truck stop. With a little apprehension, I let everything go and didn't investigate it any further. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't fall back asleep. Just as I started to drift off, I heard those footsteps again, and then what I thought sounded like someone tugging on the passenger side door handle. There was an unmistakable click, then the sway of someone stepping off the sidebar. Whoever I'd heard coughing was just trying to get inside my truck. At this point, all my alarms are going off in my head, and that structured, well-planned part of my brain is now scrambling. For whatever reason, and a lot of my friends have given me flack for it over the years, I didn't carry a gun on these truck hauls. I did have a short club that I used to check my tire pressure, and that was a great second option. At this point, I believed my best choice was to nut up and confront whoever was milling around the parking lot, let them know that my truck wasn't public property. All at once, I threw the passenger door open and clicked my flashlight on. I had a small, steady streamlight that could reach something like 30 yards, not with the puffy yellow flare of a cheap flashlight, but with a white, concentrated light. I swept it back and forth, saw nothing, so I started inspecting the truck and the trailer. I saw nothing at first glance, so I hopped down and did a full lap of the rig. Still nothing, not even underneath it. Only one option left now, time to go look at that van. I swept the flashlight around and started marching up to the rear. I wanted to see the license plate before I checked it out any further. As I went to eye the back of the bumper, I brought my light up so I could see. My eyes naturally went to the license plate, which was from South Dakota, but something else caught my attention. I couldn't place it at first, but as I kept looking, it all came into focus. Below the back of the van, near the far back tire, there was a pair of boots. Someone was crouched and hiding on the other side of it. Only the toe tips poked out, but it was enough for me to see what was going on. I left the light on the boots for 10 to 20 seconds, long enough for them to realize that they were exposed. I watched in disbelief as the boots slowly shuffled backward until they were completely hidden behind the tire. My stomach soured at the whole thing. This person clearly had ill intentions, and I wanted nothing to do with them. I wanted to say something, but I found myself completely speechless. I'm not confrontational. You may have gleaned that from my lack of a firearm. I didn't want to issue a threat to someone who might have the upper hand. I just backed up until I reached my truck, hopped in, and locked the door. I figured that encounter was enough. I got out and found them, who would come up and keep messing with me. We both knew what was going on at this point, so the mystery was completely over. Just some vagrant weirdo looking to make a score. Now that he knew the truck wasn't abandoned, I hoped that he would just move on. I sat for 45 minutes, and that van never moved. I didn't see anything move, no person, no door opening or closing. It's like they were still hiding behind that rear passenger tire. As the morning went on, though, sleep came and kissed me, and I knew I needed to get at least a couple more hours of rest if I wanted to have a successful day. My eyes started to droop, and soon I was snoozing. The sound that woke me this time was clear, loud, and right outside the door. It was the sound of a man clearing his throat, the sound someone makes when they want your attention. My eyes shot up, and I moved to the glass, and there, just peeking over the lip of the door, I can see someone looking into my cab. I freeze, hoping they can't see me, but it doesn't matter. This guy's eyes are rolling back and forth, taking it all in, looking for whoever is inside. He looks crazy, like he'd given himself a haircut with a butter knife. Some of it was shaved, some of it was long, and I could see nicks along his scalp. I think his eyebrows were shaved off too, but it was hard to tell in the moonlight. I could literally feel this guy pulling on the door handle, making the entire truck move. I did the only thing that I could think of, shout as loud as I could. "What do you want?" I hollered at the glass, still motionless in the back of the cab. This is also a censored conversation, as I remember swearing in literally every sentence that I spoke to this guy. He said, "It's me." "Who?" I asked. Okay, maybe this was a case of a mix-up. I sat up and reached for the club on the floor. "It's Henry, come on," he pleaded. "I don't know you. I'm not from here. Now please just get away from my truck," I explained to him. The conversation devolved from that point forward. Playing hard to get. I like it. "Let's do something different," he said. This guy went on at length about what he wanted to do to me. None of it involved violence at all. Everything this guy said was sexual from start to finish. I'm watching this guy lick the window of my semi as he tells me he wants to kiss my feet, worship me, pleasure every part of me. I'm not homophobic, but the whole thing was nauseating. As he's going on and on and on about his sexual fantasies, transitioning into what he wants me to do to him, I'm yelling for him to just please go away. Throughout the entire thing, his tone changes. He starts talking about his desires, which were much more violent. This guy wanted someone to hurt him during their sexual escapades, punched, choked, tied up, and abused, the whole shebang. I couldn't really believe what I was hearing. He switched from licking the window to tapping on it before finally smashing his fist into the glass. I had to do something. I remembered my portable DVD player and, for whatever reason, came up with this weird little plan. I opened it up and faced it away from the front of the cab so the light would illuminate my face, but he wouldn't be able to see what the light was coming from. "I'm calling the police," I said, hoping the light source would look like a car phone or a radio. "I've got your South Dakota plates too." "Nathan?" he asked. "I'm not who you're looking for. Now get the hell out of here, man," was the last thing that I ever said to this person. I watched him leap down and start running all in one swift motion. The van fired up and, without even turning its headlights on, fled from the parking lot like a bat out of hell. Honestly, I ended up doing the same. After another inspection of the trailer and tires to make sure everything was secure, I rolled out and made for Livingston. That morning, I really played with the idea of calling the police and making some kind of report, but thought it would be more trouble than it was actually worth. I didn't have the actual plate number, just that it was a Dakota van, so I figured my report would go absolutely nowhere. It wasn't until I got out of trucking that I realized how common this type of encounter was, especially after the invention of Craigslist. Truck stops have always been known for midnight rendezvous, but became explicit for random hookups all over the country, particularly for traveling men who wanted to experiment. Whoever that Henry guy was, he thought I was Richard, who was probably another trucker rolling through Montana that night. Henry must have gotten the truck station mixed up, or Richard was late to the arrival, so he got us confused. Regardless and whatever the case, I'm very glad that I had my doors locked that night, as I could be telling a very different story right now. Have a plan when you hit the road and always stick to that plan. It was December 31st, New Year's Eve. My friend Harry hired me to watch his dog, Bailey, for the weekend while he was out of town for the new year. I'm 34, he's 26, so I don't have that same urge to go out and party for New Year's Eve like he does. I was more okay with making some money and taking it easy for the night. New Year's Eve was on a Saturday. He left for the city early in the day. When I got there, he'd be back Sunday night. He left me with very basic instructions: just feed him and walk him twice a day, and keep him off the furniture. Bailey is a very small husky mix. I'm not sure what else she is, but she's about a third the size of a regular husky, and she's very quiet and well behaved. Hence why Harry was okay with me watching her instead of a dog sitter. I brought a backpack which contained my laptop, charger, toiletries, and a change of clothes for Sunday. Harry and I don't go way back. We met through mutual friends and had started going out occasionally on the weekends ever since. I would be sleeping in the spare bedroom of his house on the futon. Throughout the day, I just did stuff on my laptop and played some of Harry's video games. Later in the night, I invited my girl over with Harry's permission. His response was, "You better not in my bed," a way of jokingly saying yes, she can come over. She said she'd be getting out of work after 12, but then she'd come straight over. Harry's house is about half an hour from us, so my girl Ratty wouldn't be getting there until late. I had to kill the time alone with Bailey, watching movies until then. We were in the living room, and Bailey was by my feet. It was probably 9 p.m. when the doorbell rang. I went to answer the door, and it was a girl at the door. She looked about 30. She had a hoodie on and was holding a jacket. She introduced herself as Harry's girlfriend and said she left something here that she needed to grab. I offered to grab it if she wanted, and she said no, it's okay, she knew where it was in his room. I said okay, that's fine, and let her inside. She went straight upstairs to Harry's room and slightly closed the door behind her without latching it. I right away texted Harry, "I didn't know you had a girlfriend." She was in there for quite some time until she came back out, still holding her jacket. She came back down the stairs, thanked me, and was going straight for the door. I tried to stop her for a quick conversation, saying, "How long have you guys been dating?" And she said, "Too long," then laughed as if making a joke. I laughed too, and then she said, "Have a good night." I was a bit surprised by the interaction, but what I gathered from it was they had probably just recently broken up. Now I started to worry that maybe I shouldn't have let her in since Harry hadn't answered my text yet. I called him a few times before he picked up. He was out with his friends in a loud setting, so he could hardly hear me until he went outside to talk. I told him his girlfriend just came by to grab something, and he was completely bewildered at what I was saying. "Who are you talking about?" he said. I responded, "She said she was your girlfriend, I didn't get a name." He said in a yell, "You know I don't have a girlfriend." What did she look like? I started to feel really stupid just about now. I described the girl, and he said he had no idea who this could have been. I then proceeded to explain to him that she went upstairs to his room for a few minutes, then came back down. This was when he started freaking out. He told me to go up to his room now and check if she stole anything. Of course, I didn't know what was in his room beforehand, so he had me check for specific things, which all appeared to still be there. He tried hard to figure out who it could have been and said he'd call me back after he made some calls and sent me some pictures of different girls. Understandably, this was putting a damper on his night. I could tell he'd already been drinking, so I felt awfully stupid for letting some random girl into the house. He started sending me screenshots of different girls' Instagram accounts. None of them resembled the girl who came in. When I said no to all of them, he went silent for an hour. Then he texted me randomly, "I think I know who it was. Make sure she doesn't come back." I didn't ask any further questions. I responded, "Okay, my bad," and left it at that. Clearly, Harry was going through some serious girl drama, or so I thought. I watched the ball drop alone, not that I really cared about the new year or the ball drop at all. Later that night, Ratty finally made it over, and so we hung out in the living room together. I told her what happened, and she was shocked. But then a freakish coincidence happened. Bailey lifted her head and looked at the front door, and then there was a knocking at the door. Whoever it was didn't ring the bell. There was no shot I was opening it. I called Harry a bunch of times, but he didn't pick up. He was wasted and didn't even feel his phone vibrating. Ratty and I stayed quiet, and eventually, whoever it was went away. I was honestly unnerved now. Surely it was in connection to whoever that girl was earlier. Maybe it was even her again. Either way, I didn't want to get involved any further in what was going on. After this, we decided to migrate to the spare bedroom where we'd stay for the night on the futon. We had a movie on as we laid down, and I held her. We fell asleep in this position and woke up at some unknown hour in the night, which I later found out was less than an hour after we fell asleep. I woke to Bailey's howling. She was in the room with us. Ratty woke up after me. Bailey was at the bedroom door, with her tail wagging, howling. I whispered, "Bailey, shush." She looked at me and then came over, but she stayed staring at the door, now growling, making unhappy whimpering sounds. Then there were footsteps outside on the wood floors. We heard what had to be at least 2 pairs of footsteps tiptoeing to the door, and then the doorknob twisted. By force of habit, we had the door locked, thankfully, and a girl's voice said, "Harry." I looked at Ratty and signaled for her to stay quiet. That girl was not alone. Another light tap at the door, and then the girl's voice said, "Who's in there? This is Harry's house." I made the decision to say in a loud voice, almost a yell, "The cops have been on their way for a few minutes now, just so you know." The girl said, "Who are you?" I didn't bite. I whispered to Ratty to actually call the police, and she did. The entire time she whispered into the phone. I said loud and clear, "I dare you to do something, because by the time you do it, the cops will be running through the front door." I heard a whisper on the other side of the door, then multiple pairs of footsteps walking away from the door. We stayed in the room waiting for the cops to get there. Since the front door was left wide open by those people, the cops came right in. The house was clear by this point. I gave my entire recount of the story and then called Harry multiple times until he finally picked up, still sounding pretty drunk. One cop talked with him on the phone for a few minutes while I sat with Ratty speaking with another cop. After all this was said and done, the accepted assumption was that there was a key in Harry's room taken by that girl from hours before. This was a pretty messy situation since Harry couldn't just come all the way home this late. He practically begged me to stay the rest of the night. I had Ratty go home. I stayed because I felt responsible for letting that girl in the first place. I stayed locked in that room the rest of the night with Bailey. I literally wedged a chair against the front door, some half-ass attempt at keeping them out if they decided to return. By morning, though, it seemed that they didn't return. Harry came back earlier that day than originally planned. I'm not going to air out any more private information to the internet than I already have, just in case anyone who knows him can figure out this story is about him. But he did tell me who he thought the girl was, and the story behind it proves that men have to be careful too with the women they choose to interact with. That girl and whoever was with her's intention of breaking in wasn't to steal anything evidently, which is the scariest part. He changed his locks ASAP. I can't even imagine staying in that house if I were him after this. However, it's been a year and as far as I know, nothing has happened unless he's keeping more to the story he told me a secret. After returning from a night to celebrate the arrival of the new year, my husband and I returned to our apartment complex to turn in for the night. We both had a couple of drinks, but neither of us were intoxicated. As much as we enjoy partying with friends, when it comes down to it, we are really just homebodies. We lived in the corner penthouse suite of our complex. Although this was never confirmed, it was suspected the owners wanted to convert this apartment complex into condos. The rent certainly was not cheap, and access was limited to this floor. Upon entering the building, there is a walk-up to secure doors, and every now and then there would be a doorman to greet you as you entered or exited. There were also multiple security cameras placed throughout and around the building. It was an especially cold evening, and when we returned, there was no doorman present. It was late, at least 2:30 a.m. The foyer was empty, and one of the lights flickered softly. My husband and I entered the elevator and pressed the button to the top floor. The elevator ride was smooth, and as we ascended, I could feel myself becoming more relaxed, excited to finally be home and able to rest. My feet were killing me from wearing heels all night in the bitter cold. The bell chimed, signaling we had reached our floor. The door slid open, and we turned the corner to the left. Like I said, our suite was the corner suite at the end of the hall. However, something caught our eye. A woman, or what at least looked like a woman, was meandering through the hallway. Her hair was dark and scattered, it looked to be matted and covered her face. She wore a black lace dress that was torn and looked to be in bad shape. Thinking back, I don't even think she had any footwear on. We assumed she was intoxicated and was having difficulty finding her suite. Although on closer inspection, she didn't look familiar. We knew all of our neighbors, as, like I said, access was limited on this floor. I looked at my husband, who stood still as well. I could see he was contemplating the same thoughts. I asked him, should we ask if she needs help? He looked at me and said, just wait, maybe she's just drunk and having a hard time finding her suite. The woman just continued to slowly slide herself along the walls of the hallway, stopping at each door and peering through the exterior peepholes. Admittedly, this was creepy, but it just added to the theory that she was a drunk woman looking for her friends. She was humming, or what I believe was humming. The sound was something between a growl and a hum. We stood there in utter disbelief and awe. However, there was a veil of tension and uneasiness that lingered. The strange woman stumbled through the hallway, hunched over, until she pulled herself up to peer through the peephole. She eventually got to a suite of an elderly lady, whom I have a strong connection with. We'll just call her Evelyn. Evelyn was the sort of woman whose family had neglected her and rarely visited. She would bring my husband and me baked goods from time to time. I would bring her leftovers and assist her with groceries and medication. Frequently, Evelyn's smoke alarm would constantly go off. I would have to rush over and pull out the smoldering toast from her toaster and fan her smoke alarm until it stopped beeping. At times, a nuisance, but it would always turn into tea time. Nevertheless, I cared about Evelyn. So when I saw this strange woman peer into her peephole, I reacted. I blurted out, "Excuse me, are you all right?" I could feel myself lose confidence as I asked. The strange woman seemed to shudder for a moment and hunched over to the floor. She looked like she was about to puke or was frightened by my voice. My husband and I stepped closer, but the woman then let out a series of soft and menacing laughs, just barely audible. I have to admit, in this moment I was thoroughly creeped out and reached for my cell phone. It was uncomfortable because we couldn't get to our suite. Without having to walk right past this deranged woman, my husband said, "Hey, did you hear us? Do you need help?" Her laugh began to grow into what was a steady cackle. The strange woman then stood up. As she stood up, her cackle became a mixture between a cackle and a boisterous growl. She then stumbled forward and continued walking down the hall. There was a staircase just outside of our suite. I assumed she was making her way to the stairs, just too embarrassed to walk past us to the elevator. Maybe she was just a drunk woman, and this was nothing more than an uncomfortable standoff with a sad and intoxicated woman. I mean, if she was really that drunk, the stairs probably weren't a good idea. We were on the 7th floor. Nevertheless, I just didn't feel like it was worth the risk to engage with this woman. I just wanted to enter my suite and dive into bed. It was late, and my feet still hurt. As we took a few steps forward, the woman stopped, almost with laser precision. She stood up completely straight, looked right at our door, and then began to pound on our door, screaming bloody murder. I could feel myself becoming swallowed with fear. I reached for my cell phone and began to dial 911. The woman kept pounding on our door and screaming. To be honest, I'm surprised none of our neighbors came out to see what was happening. Part of me thinks they were too afraid themselves and were probably peering out of their peepholes. Afraid of what our neighbors would think, my husband said, "Hey, what are you doing? Stop that." And just like that, the strange woman stopped, fell to the ground, and began crawling quickly towards us. She looked up for a brief second. All I could see were her dark eyes. Her mouth seemed to be stained black, and she was growling again, but this time it was as if there was something in her throat that she was choking on. Frozen with fear, my husband and I just watched until she flashed us a menacing hiss, the kind you would hear in a movie but never imagined in real life. Terrified, I whipped off my shoes, and my husband and I ran towards the staircase on the other side of the building. We didn't want to risk waiting for the elevator and have her catching up. We went down 2 flights of stairs and stopped to listen if she was making her way down the stairs, but it was almost impossible to hear as my heart was pounding so hard. I thought to myself, what the hell was going on? We waited there for 10 minutes or so until eventually, we had the courage to head up the stairs and back to our suite. The woman was gone, and so we entered our suite. I was just relieved to finally be safe in my home. My husband sent a text to our landlord, and he replied that we would hear from him in the morning. I was so unbelievably exhausted but found it incredibly difficult to sleep. The sound of that woman's growling and cackling rang in my ears. I hardly slept. The next day, when my husband went to speak to the landlord, he asked him to check the security cameras. Although nothing turned up, the landlord said the cameras glitched due to the frigid temperatures last night. To this day, I still don't know what to think. That woman most certainly had problems. The question is, was she dangerous? We moved about a year later, but every New Year's Eve, I still think about that night. It was New Year's Eve of 2020, and all of us were ready for this horrible year to be over. My friend Michael was throwing a house party. I arrived early to help set things up. I secured a spot to sleep in his parents' room, meaning I could drive to the party and drink without having to worry about driving home. His parents obviously weren't home for the night. Most of our close friends in our friend group came, plus a bunch of Michael's friends who I didn't know. The party was fun. At midnight, everyone screamed "Happy New Year" and cheered their drinks. After that, people slowly started circulating out, and the party started to quiet down as people went to either other parties, bars, or home. The later the night got, the more it became just the closer friends staying behind, until it just turned into a chilled drinking session in the living room. This went on late into the night. It was likely 2:40 a.m. when the last of everyone who wasn't sleeping at Michael's house was gone. As it quieted down, we started hearing this occasional sound. At first, we didn't know what it was, but it soon started to sound like a creaking sound. It was dismissed as a sound from the fridge or something at first, which I know sounds stupid, but house appliances often make weird noises. It was just Michael, me, and Lloyd. Lloyd was falling asleep on the couch already. It was reaching that time where we were just going to go to sleep. However, eventually, we got so bothered by the noise that we had to search. We went to the kitchen, and it wasn't coming from in there. We realized when we were close to the basement door that it was coming from downstairs. Michael opened the door, and we heard this creaking sound. "Go check what it is," I said. He kept saying, "No way." Then he called down into the basement, "Yo, who's down there?" The creaking stopped, and we never heard it again. After a solid minute of waiting at the top of the stairs, we agreed to go down together. We both grabbed knives, drunkenly thinking that was a good idea, when in reality, we were so drunk we'd probably only hurt ourselves with them. We got to the bottom of the stairs and looked through the entire basement. It's not huge, it just has a couch, TV, a bar, a table in the corner, and various old pieces of junk. It was pretty messy at the time. The first thing we did was search any possible crevice for someone who could be hiding. Then we tried to figure out what could have been making that sound. I noticed a rocking chair, and so I went up to it, sat in it, and then started rocking in it. It made the exact same creaking sound we had been hearing. Michael and I looked at each other. I stood up, and so did every hair on my body. I don't think we ever ran faster than we did when we ran up those stairs and slammed the door shut. We tried to come up with any logical explanation, but there was none. He kept the basement door locked for days until his parents came back. There was no living soul down there, but something was moving that rocking chair. That rocking chair used to belong to his grandma, who passed away forever ago, and it's just something his mom held on to for sentimental reasons. I can't say I've ever experienced anything resembling the paranormal before this, nor since then. It still sends chills down my spine,